open this hearing of the Senate Economics Legislation Committee into the inquiry into Cash Distribution Framework Bill 2026 and a related bill. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all collectively meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating today. The committee will be conducting today's hearing via video conference and possibly in person. I have Senator Little, who is participating remotely, along with Senator Walker. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. And I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, you are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policy or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised, and a copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I remind senators of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian Parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. And I remind committee members and witnesses who are appearing via video conference who are not speaking to mute their microphones. So I now welcome a representative from Linfox Armagard. I understand information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? Oh, I can't hear you. Can other people
No, I can't hear
hear?
I think he's on mute.
About that.
Oh, that's better.
Okay.
Oh, and I see there's people in person as well. My apologies. Sorry, Mr. Fox. Do you want to introduce yourself again?
Yes, my name is Peter Fox. I'm speaking today as Executive Chair of Linfox Armagard. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the Senate Economics Legislation Committee inquiry into the cash distribution framework bills. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Just before you kick off with what sounds like about to be an opening statement, I might go to the people in Canberra. If you can just introduce yourselves, starting at one end for the Hansard, and then we'll come back to you.
No problem.
My name is Bill Kelty. I'm a Director of Linfox Armagard.
My name's Matt Caulfield. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Armagard.
And my name's Liza Grage-Perry. I'm the General Counsel and Company Secretary of Linfox Armagard.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fox, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I'm speaking today as Executive Chair of Linfox.
Go right ahead.
I'm speaking today as Executive Chair of Linfox Armagard, and on behalf of the shareholders, which is 65% owned by Linfox and ultimately the Fox family, and 35% owned by the Spanish listed entity Prosegur Cash. We agree that the cash distribution is a service that is critical to ensure cash is available to all Australians. Cash is and continues to be legal tender in Australia. Since 2020, Linfox and the Fox family have now spent over $125 million in propping up or subsidising Armagard's cash distribution losses. Losses were caused predominantly by a reduction in cash usage that was exacerbated by COVID, and several loss-making contracts with our major customers that were agreed to during a price war with Proseca, similar to a knife fight in a phone booth between two parties. Run density for cash services has also significantly declined as banks have closed branches and closed ATM networks, with the biggest impact seen in regional and remote areas of Australia, leading to much higher costs per individual job that Armaguard had to service. I've been seeking to engage with both the Treasury and the Reserve Bank of Australia about Armaguard's trading losses for many years, in fact since 2020. Speaking to both Treasurer Frydenberg back in his prior capacity as Treasurer, and several discussions with Michelle Bullock. This can be demonstrated by files of letters to the Prime Minister and successive Treasurers and shadow Treasurers and two Reserve Bank governors, including Michelle Bullock. The majority of correspondence that has been communicated through to both telephone calls and emails have gone unanswered. In the last 6 years, the government has spent no money and $0 on cash distribution. Armaguard shareholders and the board have taken significant private action of our own volition to ensure the continuity of cash distribution in Australia. This has included the merger between Proseca and Armaguard about 3 years ago, which has removed excess capacity in infrastructure. In fact, as many as 30 branches have been closed across the country, enabling us to save $38 million worth of efficiencies in the combined two businesses. The merger at the time was subject to a 3-year ACCC understanding for price and non-price terms, which expire in September this year. Secondly, although the merger enabled significant benefits to be accrued to the enterprise, the cash in transit business still continues to this day to be loss-making based on current pricing and inefficient service delivery models, such as just-in-time servicing. After the FTI report was concluded about 3 years ago now, we collectively negotiated a short-term funding arrangement with Armaguard's largest 8 customers: Coles, Woolworths, Wesfarmers, Australia Post, National Australia Bank, ANZ, Westpac and Commonwealth Bank. Those arrangements were based on the development of an independent pricing model that would secure the longer-term future of cash in our country. We needed to take cost out of the business. The entire management team at the top of the tree was completely removed and replaced. A new management team under the leadership of Matt Caulfield, who is here today in Parliament to present the position on the Armaguard business, has been replaced, and new management has been tasked with cutting costs, creating efficiencies and ensuring we deliver our arrangements under the ACCC undertaking. Armaguard has led a joint industry working group with these 8 funding parties dedicated to both standardisation and sectorisation. After more than 30 meetings that have been held to try and achieve the realisation of $15 million worth of annual benefits, not $1 of saving of the $15 million has been achieved. As I repeat, industry efficiencies of $15 million have not been achieved with over 30 meetings that have been held with the 8 funding parties. Investment in the business has occurred on top of $125 million, which we have invested both in equity and in debt to the tune of $50 million. We have not taken a dividend for a number of years now, and the shareholders accept that there is unlikely to be any return for the next few years, as the independent pricing model requires a commitment to be made to restructuring, a continuing of the restructuring, and CapEx that must be invested and prioritised to ensure there are debt repayments and dividends. As I said prior to this, there has been $0 spent by the government, and there will continue to be $0 put in by the government in regards to the independent pricing model. We understand that there could be a safety net in case cash use continues to decline or there are other unforeseen circumstances. But the proposed legislation that you are here contemplating today is blatantly unfair. In the face of what we have achieved to date without any help from the government, this is a nationalisation by stealth. It is not in our common or collective interests to be doing so. The Reserve Bank of Australia can appoint a statutory manager or direct the transfer of our business assets or shares without any consent is an absolute outrageous affront. That they are to be empowered to order recapitalisation and could cherry-pick particular assets out of our enterprise and leave us with liabilities is not either reasonable for a business of this character, and the compensation provisions are completely unclear. The draft legislation puts at risk every effort we'd endeavoured over the last 3 years for a sustainable business. Why would we agree to the independent pricing model? Where will we spend tens of millions of dollars on capital, foregoing debt repayments and dividends, when the business could be transferred by the Reserve Bank of Australia without notice and without any right of reply at any time? Why would this even be considered is absolutely ludicrous. We already know that the multiple triggers for the Reserve Bank of Australia crisis independent intervention powers are in play. We have business risks for financial standing and ongoing key supply arrangements, including bailment and commercial cash, which will need to be notified to the Reserve Bank of Australia on day one of these new laws. That is not news to the Reserve Bank of Australia. We have been telling them this for the last 6 years and since 2020. The unreasonable urgency that is applying to this legislation comes from concern about the upcoming expiry of Armaguard's ACCC undertakings. Let me go on the record to say there will be no false or improvided service to any postcode throughout Australia. All we want is to enact some service delivery efficiencies, such as certain run days per week, rather than just-in-time servicing, and more importantly, fair pricing for customers that are currently loss-making. These customers are some of Australia's largest and wealthiest and clearly most powerful corporates, the major banks and the Australian retailers. We are asking, therefore, that this committee that's convened considers delaying the implementation of this legislation to allow us to finalise arrangements that will address our greatest business interruption risks, include the independent pricing model and or new bilateral arrangements with our major customers. The second point, the Fair Work Commission hears and decides whether there is or not going to be minimum industry standards for security or cash in transit in Australia. We need to reach agreement with our employees around a new enterprise-based agreement that is being considered for the next 3-year term. Mind you, and we should be very complimentary of the Transport Workers Union in Australia, who have provided us with very little industrial unrest throughout this last 3-year period of incredible uncertainty. That the bailment and commercial cash supply arrangements from the big banks are settled. I ask of you that these 3 or 4 things be provided, allow us to be provided and put in place. We ask the committee to reconsider the draft legislation in line with specific suggestions set out in our submission that you will have a copy of, at least to get rid of the onerous transitional provisions that go against fundamental rules of law, like the right to procedural fairness and to seek judicial review on their merits. I ask that you amend the RBA's direction powers so that they at least need to give notice and reason to entities before they appoint a statutory manager or direct recapitalisation or the transfer of shares or businesses, and that the designated entity has a right to respond and seek review of any such directions. This process has been completely onerous, arduous and entirely unfair. The way ahead is for us to be dealing with the ACCC that we have worked diligently with for the last few years, present the independent pricing model to them for ratification, establish a new Transport Workers Union enterprise-based agreement, and allow this business to get on with sectorisation and standardisation of the routes. We are more than happy for an exhaustive inquiry into this industry. I thank you for your time and thank you for listening to what I've got to say about where we are at. I hope you can be of help to us.
Thanks very much, Mr. Fox. We'll now go to some questions. Do you have the statement that you made that you're able to share with us? Because I think that would be helpful.
Senator, our General Counsel, Liza, should have a copy there, and more than happy to have it.
Yeah, if that could be circulated to the committee, thank you. And we'll go to Senator Little for questions first.
Thank you for that detailed submission, Mr. Fox. I'm wanting to ask, the RBA in its submission has said that cash has stabilised at around 15% payments. Are you able to give me some indication of how much cash is actually moved around the country at any point in time? Would you accept those figures?
The actual numbers will be in the hands of our management team. I might have, if you don't mind, Senator Little, to have Matt Caulfield answer that question. He'll give you a more accurate position than what I would.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, Senator, currently the business moves about 8,000 to 9,000 jobs per day, roughly $170 billion per year. So $3 to $3.5 billion per week is being moved around all corners of the country.
Thank you.
Mr. Fox. Matt, sorry, just the actual percentage, Matt, of the 15% that's quoted by the RBA.
Yeah, this calendar year stabilised at around 15%. That is correct. We got down to roughly 13% with the information we had.
Right, thank you. I want to ask a question about, it's clear that your business has monopoly on cash in transit and distribution. It is an essential service. I'm interested in understanding, though, the makeup of the board. This is a private company, it's a family business. I noticed that there are a number of directors on both of those boards, and some of those directors are obviously on both the International Group Board and the Australia Proprietary Limited Board. Can you tell me a little bit about how often the board meets? How you identify who are directors of that board?
Well,
both of those boards.
You can go to ASIC to identify who the actual directors are on the board. It's myself, my two brothers. Bill Kelty is a director. We have representation from our partnership, so it's not typically run as a family business. Throughout my tenure of being chairman of this group for the last 23 years, I run a public company governance type of model. We have non-exec directors that are present, and there is 2 directors from Proseca, which is a public company. So the administration and the process adopted in running a board is we carry out monthly meetings. We have audit, compliance and risk committees to that board. It's no different from how we govern a public company. You can't run a company with over 30,000 employees these days, typically as a private company on a laissez-faire basis. We run it along exactly the same lines as any public company would be run in Australia today.
Right. So with you saying the board meets every month, over that period that the previous arrangements were negotiated, that board would have met on a monthly basis or more often in that period?
Yes.
Right. I wanted to ask about the September 2023 ACCC agreement. And I understand you talked earlier about several undertakings around not increasing prices and to continue servicing all postcodes. Is that fair? That was an undertaking?
Absolutely. The position that we were allowed to do was CPI plus an increase of 7.5%, and there has not been any individual customers that have gone beyond that bandwidth of restraint that was placed on us by the ACCC. Even under the duress, Senator, of customers that have been losing money.
Are there any of those undertakings that your company gave that you weren't able to meet? And if you weren't, what was the reasons for that?
Perhaps I could
respond. I think I'll have our legal counsel answer that question, Senator Little.
We've had only a small number of very minor findings out of our audits. We have 3 monthly audits of the undertaking, and the findings were we had an obligation to report 3-month lead time of when we were closing depots, and due to the employment distress and actually just as a result of the property processes, we did breach that obligation in the very early days. We then sought an amendment of the undertaking to ensure that we only needed to give 1 month's lead time to that. We also breached the undertaking when we unilaterally terminated some customer contracts because we had very strong suspicion that those customers were using our services for criminal conduct. We were participating in investigations with the police that involved significant values of money that was being collected for businesses that weren't of the character. So we again sought a waiver of the undertaking for those small breaches, and the ACCC approved that waiver. In very limited circumstances, we can unilaterally terminate a contract, but only if we have very substantial reasons. So on the whole, we've had a very, very compliant undertaking period. We haven't had a single dispute raised. We haven't had a single complaint raised from any customer in the course of our undertaking.
I just want to stick with the agreement and how it is that just a month after the ACCC agreement was finalised, that there were issues raised about financial sustainability concerns with the RBA and the banks. It's not a very long period. I'm just trying to understand how that has occurred if your board was meeting regularly during this period.
Do you want me to answer that, Senator? So shortly after the live merger in September 2023, the major variance to what was the original business case for the merger to go through ACCC approval was, one, the expectation back then of cash rebounding did not occur. In fact, it's evidenced by a number of reports suggested cash might have fallen to 4%. So that drop in volume had a material impact immediately on the performance of the business. But above that, the merger actually took place in September after delays for it to become active. And from the start of that calendar year, those 9 months into September, when the merger originally was going to be in place, the numbers that the board was presented and looking at were obviously delayed, and with that volume decline, there's been a lag in the benefits of the merger and a volume number much lower than the original business case.
We never said in the application to the ACCC for authorisation that the merger would solve all the problems. We made it clear that even if the merger went ahead, then there would still be a fundamental pricing problem with major customers. We made that absolutely clear, that in essence the pricing problem is only about the major customers. And that was known. That was actually known when the application was made. At no point did we ever purport to say that the merger by itself would solve the problems. At no point did we say that. We said that there was a fundamental problem with major customers which had reduced the margins by 40, 50%. And that was the position. So that it was only a recognition of that basic fact. And that's still the case. As Peter Fox has said, there has been an independent report commissioned under the auspices of the Reserve Bank, an independent report commissioned under the auspices of the Reserve Bank following our representations in order to test and verify our proposition, and they confirmed, and we have provided this information, but if you go to page 29 of that FTI report, that confirms that the loss making was $51 million in terms of the EBITDA, 52 million. Nearly all of that was due to the 4 major banks and 2 major retailers. What was necessary, according to this independent report commissioned by the Reserve Bank, was that all customers would, in order to get just a break-even position of 20.6%, but the 4 major banks would require an increase of 80%. And that is because they reduced the prices in that competitive position by 40 to 50%. So let it not be understood for one moment that we ever purported or represented to the ACCC that the merger by itself was sufficient. We never said that. And your observation that it being only 1 month after is entirely consistent with that position, because we made it absolutely clear that when an independent report which verified our position said that the major customers, these 6 major customers, which had reduced the margins by 40 to 50%, some cases more, that they required a price adjustment just to bring it to a point of no loss, required a price increase of 80%, over 80%, 82.5%. And that's verifiable. That's verifiable. That's the history here. So, you know, don't think for one moment we went to the ACCC saying that the merger would resolve the issue. We went saying the merger would resolve some of the issue and would provide an efficiency dividend of $38 to $40 million, which it has and did. That was our submission, and that was a very important thing to procure. But the fundamental problem here, in addition to the decline in cash, was the significant reduction in margins. These were incredible reduction in margins in an incredibly competitive environment. Now, we don't have to rely upon our own observations. Just report 2 things, 2 independent assessments. One by KPMG confirmed later the FTI position. So just go to page 29 of the report, of the FTI report. It confirms that the fundamental pricing problem was the 6 major customers, and they required an adjustment, just the banks, of 82.5%. That's their independent report.
Right. It's clear from your earlier submission, Mr. Fox, that you have particular concerns. You don't like this legislation. How much of that is actually about the government and how it's arrived at this point that it is now towards the end of July? The funding cliff comes into place in September. What would you say about the process that's been followed to get to this point?
I'll unmute it. I think we're right on the precipice of getting these arrangements in place. The IPM is about to be presented in an imminent period of time to the ACCC. I think the ACCC should, and the parties have agreed all the way through for the last 3 years since the FTI report to be accepting of independent pricing. So, and then I think the workforce has been very collaborative and reasonable throughout this period of time, allow us the opportunity to get a new 3-year enterprise-based agreement with the workforce. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the sectorisation and the standardisation now that needs to take place inside of the business to deliver these efficiencies should come through the ABA. I mean, we've been meeting with the ABA now every month for the last 3 years, and they've delivered not $1 of efficiency to the business. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the introduction of this new legislation is going to do what? Like, what are you trying to do? It just seems to me that it's completely onerous, arduous, and entirely unfair.
Mr. Fox, you seem to indicate that you would not be lodging an IPM if the legislation goes through. Can you confirm and clarify your position on this? Because that would be a significant walkback from public protections.
But where do you get that inference from?
Well, I'm just asking whether you can clarify that from the information you gave earlier.
No, that's not the position. I think you know. No, that's not our position, and it'd be interesting to know where you're getting that information from.
Do you expect that some of the things that allow the RBA to act, have you done any work to understand whether that is likely that the RBA will intervene?
Act in what sense? Like, I'm not sure of what you're trying to get to.
Well, we have a position where the minister can make a decision and the Parliament has no ability to intervene in that. Have you done any work to understand whether that particular provision in the legislation will be able to be used or will be used by the RBA?
No, I haven't given it consideration. But the management model, but I personally haven't given it any consideration. You know, I don't know and don't understand or comprehend where you want to go with all of this or give consideration to this of taking over a private enterprise with 3,000 workers as to how the workforce would regard that. Like, you want to manage an operation here that's a transport operation and a cash processing operation. You know, I thought we live in a laissez-faire country where private enterprise should be encouraged. I mean, here's the situation that I just, from the outset, looks incredibly ludicrous, and I think it's been conspired by people that are being driven with a separate agenda.
So why do you think this legislation has come into existence?
I'm going to have to rotate. Sorry, just intervene for a second. Senator Little, do you have how many more questions do you have, just so that I can manage the time?
No, happy for you to rotate. I've still got a few questions.
Why don't you finish your block and then, Yep.
You're right to go, Mr. Fox, if you'd like to answer that.
Can you repeat your question? I've finished my statement.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the opening statement. You actually said, why would we agree to the IPM when the business could be taken away? That's why I went to ask you whether you expect that there would be any action, or that you would be prepared to comply with that requirement. That's why I wanted you to clear that up.
Perhaps I could respond, Senator Little, if I may. What we're concerned about is that the RBA have got very broad powers to intervene with very little guidelines, very little opportunity. There's no notice to be given. There's no opportunity to respond, no materiality or threshold provisions whereby if one branch goes out, for instance, if our employees take protected industrial action in one branch, it really allows, the legislation as drafted, allows the whole business to be transferred across. And the independent pricing model requires significant capital investment. So as Mr Fox has said, they don't take a dividend for the first 3 years under the first control period. So we're concerned that without some additional safeguards that the shareholders could spend a significant amount on capital expenditure and then have the business transferred without a right of reply, without an opportunity to remedy or work together. And as we've already pointed out, we haven't had a lot of traction with engaging with the RBA, so we don't really know what their intentions are. We only had 1 day's notice of the draft legislation. We haven't been at the table, so you'll understand why we're concerned. And we're not stepping back.
The Parliament, of course, has very little potential to intervene as well, which is what I'm wanting to
That's the other thing. Yes, that's right. The fact that...
Can I just make a few additional points to that which Peter has made? And I want to deal essentially with a number of issues: the industrial relations environment. And secondly, the issue of the public interest. And I think it's important to understand that we've provided the information. We're happy for the debate. We're happy for a much more detailed inquiry if necessary, because allegations are made about behaviour, allegations are made about fact. We're more than happy for a very detailed inquiry in which we test all the propositions. But essentially our concerns are the ones that Peter outlined. We actually think it's premature for this legislation to go ahead. We think it is onerous in terms of its intent. We think it is unfair, and we also think, most importantly, it's not in the public interest. This is not in the public interest. The issue of financial viability arose for the reasons that we've provided, that are outlined in the information we've provided. Cash has been falling. We've made big adjustment processes internally and had to. The FTI report was very fair and very balanced. That is, said there had to be $50 million of price adjustments, there had to be improvements in efficiency, and the company had to put in more capital. That is, it was a collective problem that required a collective resolution, and we accept that. So we don't come here saying that that is all about just one problem or one set of institutions. It's a collective problem that needs to be dealt with collectively. Now, can I just go to the industrial relations? The employees have been coming to work nearly every day for a great number of years, not knowing whether...
Mr Kelty?
Yes?
Mr Kelty, can I just let you know we are going to hear from the TW directly straight after you conclude as well, just so that you're aware.
I understand that, but don't think for one moment that the TW has a monopoly on the interests of the employees. We also are very concerned with these employees. Now, and that's not to deny the relevance of the union, but we deal with these employees. They've been loyal, they've been committed, they've been asked to make some very big changes, They've lost conditions of employment, they've had no real wage improvement for a long time. In fact, they've had a real wage reduction. And we've dealt with the union positively, and the union itself has been very positive in dealing with their futures, and they have represented their futures. But that is the industrial relations environment. But that agreement is not settled. That agreement is not settled. That agreement is dependent upon the IPM, and it is not settled. This legislation goes through, whatever it does, it undermines the capacity of the IPM to work. It undermines that capacity. And that, therefore...
I'd actually like to really explore the IPM a bit further if we can, recognising the time constraint that we all have here. When do you expect to agree to the Deloitte negotiated IPM? And if there's been a hold-up, what was the reason for that?
Well, I'll give the answer and then we can supplement. We have a board meeting next week to support putting in our submissions, final submissions on the IPM, to endorse those submissions next week to confirm that. The delay has been due to efficiencies not being met in terms of the industry resolution, which have affected the economic outcome. Propositions being raised that the customers who did not reduce the margins pay a bigger price than those which did reduce the margins. So there's been issues of cost allocation and price rectification. Very significant issues have been subject to a myriad of financial involvement. There have been questions raised about the interrelationship between the logistics business and the cash processing. We have had to answer those on numerous occasions. They are continually raised. So that's the reasons for the delay. The reasons for when it will be put in. We intended and will go to a board meeting next week with support for the position. And that requires the board to accept that there will be no dividends payable under the control period for 3 years, that the money that is generated from the business will be used to have restructuring and investment. That's the outcome of the independent pricing. That is, it's about a process of adjustment to change. That is, the investable income that is generated from the business with the fair prices will be used to pay for redundancies and to pay for capital for the 3-year period. That's the proposition, which we are prepared to support, I believe. But that's a final decision for the board. That goes through next week. And that is not an easy decision for shareholders, considering that they've had no dividend and they've made a contribution. This is a very significant step, but it is underpinned by other things. It is underpinned by the Industrial Relations Agreement. That is the agreement that exists to work with the union, to work with the employees, and that's not cemented. The union has put very innovative things in terms of providing for retirement benefit. It is a requirement in terms of the wage adjustments that we're talking about for training to adjust. This is a very innovative and modern industrial agreement that is being proposed that we're prepared to work with. But that's not settled. The point is, that's not settled. The IPM is not settled. The underlying conditions about the framework for the wage rates and the conditions under which the work is not settled. Matt will give you a report on what are the essential conditions under which the work is to be performed. For good or bad, we have a view that this is an industry which requires safety and security of the highest levels. But the chain orders, which the union initiated, are not settled. And mate will give you a description of some of the behaviours which exist in the industry. Perhaps you can...
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Also, from a security and safety perspective, Senator, just in this last 3 months, so we've had 2 armed robberies. We've got numerous examples of unarmoured vehicles and unarmed single men or single people crew in our depots moving millions of dollars of cash around the country. There is no standard or requirement or accountability for that. So one of the nervousness management has, and not just in terms of insurance, but most importantly the safety and well-being of our people, is they then become compromised. So we have what's called a tracking system called MIOSH that looks at near misses and red flags. So they're at the highest they've been in my time at Armaguard. And whilst the workforce is in an environment with guns, cash, cost of living challenges, when we've got competitors out there that don't have guns and don't have armoured vehicles, it doesn't make it a very comfortable place to be if you're a director or a senior manager. And where that links back to the IPM or to this legislation, the IPM and the legislation is not looking at safety and security, which is our number one priority. And when we lodged the ACCC application on December 23rd last year, the IPM, everybody I think agrees, is the solution to transition the industry, but we could not tell customers what that meant for them. And so the delay that you originally asked about means we need to be able to talk to 1,300 customers. There's around 120 that have been encompassed into the IPM. 99.5% of them don't lose money. So the delay over and above what Bill Kelty was referring to means we need to get back to the ACCC, but also to the customers to say this is what it means for them, underpinning the fact that those customers also want the safety and the standards. Our customers don't want a person turning up without a gun, without a companion and without an armed vehicle. So it all forms part of a solution we believe we think we're close to resolving, hence the request that this legislation is at least delayed and reviewed.
So we have a fundamental problem, Senator. We operate armoured vehicles, the personnel are armed, they are trained, they have a very, very important job. They are not just drivers, as some people would have it believe. These are people trained and committed to the security of handling and processing cash. And we're putting an IPM and having a pricing system based on those set of standards that we believe are appropriate for this industry. But the proposed arrangements in respect of the alternative do not mention security, do not mention safety. And when we raise it with the bodies, they say they can't do everything. But it is the starting point for this industry. This is the starting point. That is, we provide a service that is based on high levels of security and absolute commitment to safety. There are two-person vehicles. The vehicles do not cost $100,000, they cost $300,000. They are armoured vehicles. The starting point, the very starting point in our view, is the security of the employees and the safety of the community. Without that, we do not wish to be involved in this industry. We will not do this in any other way. But you have proposals which say that some people, they can take it over, but without those commitments to security and safety. And there are no standards established by so far in this industry. So we just think that it's premature to proceed with alternatives without getting the fundamentals right. At least get the ground rules established. At least get the ground rules established. Our ground rules are very clear. And this is not artificial. I've been involved in this industry for a great number of years. I actually remember people getting killed. I remember people getting killed. I remember having to face up to organised crime in particularly parts of New South Wales. I remember ATMs being smashed and taken out. I remember our drivers and our security people being threatened by organised crime. These people need protection. At least establish the ground rules. What are the ground rules for this industry? What are the standards to apply to this industry before this legislation is introduced, and which can be taken over without any of those commitments? And of course it's relevant to the IPM because our pricing and our method of work is based on those propositions. Our agreement with the union is based on those propositions. This is mutual concern to protect the community, and that is being undermined by this proposal. It is undermined. Not one word is in this legislation which goes to security. Not one word goes to safety. Not one word. Because we can't do everything is our response. No, that answer is not good enough in our view. The answer is you don't do this work without commitments in security and without commitments in safety. That is the starting point. That is the starting point in any consideration of this bill. That is the starting point.
Thank you. Can I ask, did Armaguard ask for or support the crisis powers in this bill, and have you got any hearing at all directly with either the Treasurer or Treasury officials in relation to the crisis powers in this bill, including the $400 million?
No, we did not. We did not support the crisis power. We have never asked for $400 million. Never asked for $400 million to be set aside. We do not believe that. We think that is entirely inappropriate public policy. We believe that with effective pricing, fair pricing determined under the auspices of the ACCC, authorised by them, with an industrial agreement which facilitates change, facilitates the payment of redundancy, facilitates early retirement, with management committed to increase efficiency, the public do not need to pay $1 extra. Not $1 extra should the public be asked to pay. We strongly oppose that. We think it's an entirely inappropriate public policy. We never asked for it, and we do not support it. We actually think, to be frank about it, that when people get paid so little in unemployment benefits, where hospitals are under pressure, where we have an inadequacy in terms of nursing, where teachers are underpaid in this country, that there are better things for society to allocate than this, when the resolution is very, very simple. That is, proper funding, proper pricing, management changing, the union adjusting to change in terms of agreement, the employees adjusting. We think that's a proper resolution. It is not our view. We have never once ever submitted that view and would never do it. It is a policy of lunacy and stupidity. Frankly, this country can do better than that. We can do better than that. This country deserves better than that. We come here saying to you quite plainly and clearly that we do not support $400 million being set aside, that we support fair pricing. We will negotiate and can negotiate with the union for a proper and adjustment process. That's what we're putting. That's what we're putting. That we will manage it. That we will manage it with those objectives. And we will work with the union, we'll work with the unions. We will work with the customers, and we will work as a mature response to this problem. This is the exact opposite to our approach. We have never asked for it and never would ask for it. You just imagine. Can you imagine why a country would set aside $400 million? What, you want to pay for the redundancies? $200 million for redundancy, $160 million for new trucks, $100 million for the cash processing. You want to continue the operation with inadequate pricing to effectively subsidise those which reduce margins? Do you think we would be so silly to ask that of public policy? We do not ask that of public policy. Why would we come here and say to the government, set aside $400 million to effectively subsidise the 4 major banks and 2 major retailers? Because that's in essence what's being asked. We would not ask that, and we have never asked that. We think it is not good public policy.
Thank you. I do have another question, but I think I need to put that on notice.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Little. We're running a little behind time, so I'll try and just keep my questions brief and quick. If you could do the same with your answers as much as possible, that'd be much appreciated. Mr. Fox, in your opening statement, I think, just a clarification, you did mention the market share following the merger between Armaguard and Prosegur, but can you just, was it 65%?
The shareholding. The shareholding is split 65% by Lynn Fox and the Fox family, and 35. It's almost 2/3, 1/3. So my family.
I see. Yeah, right. Okay.
65%. It's not market share. It's actually ownership of the enterprise, and 35% by profit.
Yeah, my mistake.
Yeah, not market share.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of market share, what is it for the cash in transit business in Australia?
Well,
do you want me to get that, Peter?
Yeah, and Matt, I think you should talk about digital payments.
So from the data we've got, Senator...
I'm just interested in the cash distribution business.
Cash in transit market share be anywhere between 85 to 90% based on the information we have, and declining. Our market share is declining due to competitor activity. But I would like to put on the record, our need is not about market share. Our need is to get cash to all corners of the country, and we want to make it efficient, Senator, because if the costs go up, we're not interested in gouging the market to make more money, because that'll decline the use of cash. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but we're at about 85%, but we're not growing, we're falling. We've lost accounts due to the nature of the competition. Yep.
But Senator, I think...
Yeah, no worries.
I think the market, Peter made the point.
And what about your customers?
The market is not just simply about the use of cash. It's about transactions. It's about transactions. And our market share is declining.
So you conduct transactions, do you? Sorry, Mr. Kelty, I'm asking the questions. Do you do transactions as well?
No, we're involved.
Was that a yes or a no? Sorry.
No. We're involved in transporting cash and processing cash. That's what we're involved in.
Right.
But that cash industry is part...
that was
No, but it is part of a transaction industry. So when people talk about market share, it's a delusion, because the market is when I go to pay for something in terms of a transaction, I can pay by cash or I can tap and go. And that is the market. And that market, our share about that is declining as inevitably.
Yeah,
and we don't complain about that. But when people talk about market share, it's irrelevant, because that is the industry we're in.
Yeah, we're thinking about it in a broader context.
Yeah, you've got to think about it in a broader...
Yeah. And so in terms of the customers you deal with in terms of the cash, I think you've mentioned the banks. Who else are your major customers?
So the banks, Coles, Woolworths, Australia Post, Wesfarmers, and there's probably a couple of others there, but it's sort of the top 10 or the top 15. It's a classic Pareto. So that those 8 major parties that are a part of the funding arrangement, they'd be 65% of the revenue of the business, and you'd probably have another half a dozen or another 8 major customers in the tune of about $15 to $20 million that would account for probably 80% of the market, or 80% of the work that we do. And then you've got a tail. And what's the tail, Matt, of the smaller ones? There'd be hundreds of them.
Yeah, 1,300 customers in total, Peter, and the top, as you said, the top 20 make up about 80 to 85% of the volume revenue.
Yeah, okay, thank you. There's been, I think, some strong views put, but I would I ask you, perhaps Mr. Fox, do you think it's fair to say that cash distribution isn't just another commercial service, but part of our critical infrastructure that allows Australians and businesses to keep using cash, and that there is a public interest in the continuity of the kind of critical delivery of cash in that sense?
Look, it's just the answer to that question. I think people still have a fair portion of cash that we don't see in circulation. So as a storage of value and as a just in case, I think, there's probably places where some of it's shoved under mattresses. So I think people still maintain it as a storage of value for a just in case of a rainy day. And we look around the world, and our partners from Spain in Prosica, that they've now legislated that people must accept cash. So in Australia, to some degree, you can go to places and they'll only take a transaction on a credit card and will refuse to accept cash. So I think it's here to say we thought it was going to continue to decline, massive decline during COVID, and we thought it would continue to decline, and the Reserve Bank also had a view that it would settle between 6 and 8%. So to some degree, it's bounced a bit more than what we envisaged.
Yeah.
But I think for the next 3 to 5 years, I think it'll hold somewhere in the low teens, and as a number that the Reserve Bank has publicly issued in a report, cash in circulation is as high as what it's ever been.
Yeah.
Which tells
okay.
you, the amount of cash that's physically out there is as high as what it's ever been.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's
which tells you something. Yeah, it tells you something. That people are using it as a storage of value. And I think in terms of what Senator Little was questioning in regards to sorry, Senator, you might have been asking the question in terms of the market share. The business competes with those that Mr. Kelty said of a tap and go. And I think people are only just coming to realise that the charge that they're paying is somewhere between 1.5% to 2% of every tap and go transaction. So you spend $1,000 on an item, you're going to spend $15 to $20 to the people that you put it on the credit card of. But if you pay cash, you actually should be getting a $15 discount because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
People are just beginning to realise the use of a credit card is actually entailing a commission. I think that's some of the motivation that's driven from the banks to drive cash out of town, because they make a commission on what is transpiring as credit card transactions. They don't make any commission on cash, and it costs them some money to make sure they've got cash in circulation in their banks. I think that's some of the motivation as to why the banks want to get rid of it.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Kelty, you made some very strong remarks, I think, in terms of the crisis powers. I appreciate, I think it was Ms. Grage-Penny who referred to the kind of levels of engagement around the detail of how this is being developed and worked through. So maybe there's more work to do there, because my understanding is that the crisis powers will only apply where clear triggers are met, such as insolvency, administration, or a serious threat to critical services. In this kind of context, and again, taking the comments about perhaps you need to have some more engagement about the detail, do you accept that the government needs last resort tools to keep essential cash services operating in circumstances like that?
Look, I think the way to keep cash processing operating is to make sure that, first of all, it's safe and secure. That's the first starting point. That's the starting point. You asked the question whether we regard it as essential. We're in this industry. We believe in cash. We are the champions for cash. Our self-interest is in cash. So are we believers? We are believers. We believe that people should have access to cash. We think it's very important that poor people have access to cash. We think it's very important that people in regional Australia. You don't have to convince us. We're here to convince you that that's essential.
Yeah.
But that's not justification, Senator, to say because these people believe in cash and believe they should be safely that the government has the right to simply take over the business. To simply take over the business.
Well, I mean...
Now, what are the circumstances in which they would take over the business?
Isn't that important in the context of what you're saying? In terms of, we believe in people having access to cash. So if there is a crisis situation, don't we need some power to resolve that? Like it applies in banking, insurance and other settlement facilities.
But let me just be plain.
Shouldn't we have a comparable last
let me
resort
be
framework?
plain. Let me be plain about it. If the legislation goes through, but we don't have independent pricing, we don't know what the pricing is going to be. We don't know what the pricing is going to be. We have no agreement with the union. We have no agreement with the union, but the legislation goes through. We have no certainty as what the ground rules are in terms of which cash is distributed. Is it able to be distributed in a panel van or delivered by DoorDash? Or what are the standards? But we have none of that certainty. Then we have to say, if this legislation is implemented, we have to say in day one there's an emergency. We have to say that this industry is under threat and therefore the legislation can be invoked. That is before any of these things are done. This is not good public policy. This is a terrible thing to do to workers, a terrible thing to do to the investors, and a terrible thing to do to the shareholders in terms of this business. And the most important, shareholding, is a terrible thing to do to Australians. It's a terrible thing to do. You have an option.
Okay.
Fix up prices.
I think there might be some... Yep. All right. Thank you. You've made your views very clear there. I mean, what I take from some of that is, that certainty is sort of a critical factor here. And I think you talked earlier, or I can't remember which one of you, talked about this in terms of, a commercial entity. So it sounds like, in terms of providing that certainty, that the best outcome is for industry to reach sustainable commercial agreements so that the crisis powers never need to be used. Would that be a fair...
I think that's absolutely correct, Senator. I think that's the correct position. And look, if there was a trend of this going on in other parts of the world where government was stepping in and taking over the cash-in-transit industry, I'd say, yeah, we're happy to have a look at it, but it's not happening. The reverse is happening. And on the prior point that's been raised by Mr Kelty, we presented to the Senate, to Senator Glenn Sterl, 3 or 4 years ago, in an inquiry into the industry in regards to putting some industry standards in place. Nothing, not one thing has come from that Senate inquiry, and it needs to be looked at because I agree 100%. It's the safety and security and the standards that we've submitted to the Fair Work Commission that we believe this industry needs to be regulated and this industry needs to be legislated in regards to damn well putting some standards in place that ensure and protect the safety and the security of the people working in this industry. Go back and let's take what Mr Kelty has said to you and review what was presented to Senator Glenn Sterl's inquiry, and let's move forward on the basis of not adopting this legislation that is incredibly onerous and incredibly detrimental to this privately owned enterprise that's trying to get a resolve here and has done for the last 3 years. Let's look at what we can do collectively and cooperatively with what was done 3 to 4 years ago and why nothing has come from that inquiry that was put in place by Senator Sterle.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fox. I think in the interest of time, if we've got more questions, we can put them on notice. We're going to have to leave it there. We thank you very much for your appearance today, and the information that you provided will take into account.
Can I just make one point in conclusion in respect to this matter? I will prepare a written submission setting out my views in respect to this change. I've been involved in a lot of change in this country, in some of the biggest safety net negotiations. This is almost the hardest I've ever been involved in, and I will put on public record my position in respect to this. But secondly, I think the starting point for your inquiry is this. We do believe in the sustainability of cash. We believe in cash. But what we believe is that the sustainability of cash is dependent upon 4 pillars. It depends upon fair pricing so that people can make an investable surplus to generate a capacity. Secondly, we believe investment. We actually do believe in investment. And thirdly, we believe in safety and security as a fundamental pillar. And we believe for the workers involved in this industry that they should be entitled to a fair adjustment process. As their jobs are threatened and society is changed. We believe in those 4 pillars. That is not what we have reached agreement with. There is no agreement about that. But that's your starting point. Before this legislation is introduced, let's at least agree that that should be the 4 pillars upon which fair pricing exists in this country, upon which safety exists in this country, upon which workers are properly protected. This is precipitate, it's outrageous legislation designed not to deal with any of those principles, but designed to essentially say that the contracts are now running out, the commitments are now running out, put this in place as a bargaining tool against us. We don't need a bargaining tool against us. We simply don't need it if that's the basis of cooperation and understanding.
Thank you very much. With that, we will say goodbye. And if we could welcome representatives from the Transport Workers Union. I understand that there is at least one representative in the room in Canberra, so we'll just give you a minute to make your way to the table, and if there's anyone else joining us, I'm sure we'll find out.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand it is that we just have Mr. Gavin Webb. Is that right?
Yes.
I can see you there.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today. Apologies, we're running slightly behind. Okay. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, can you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Gavin Webb. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of the New South Wales branch of the Transport Workers Union of Australia.
Thank you very much. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion we will ask you some questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the TWU. The TWU represents tens of thousands of workers, including cash in transit workers, who perform some of the most dangerous work in the Australian transport industry. These workers move cash and valuables through public places, often while facing the risk of armed robbery, assault, vehicle incidents, and other serious hazards. The committee should consider the cash distribution framework in this context. It cannot be limited to market structure, access, or efficiency. It must begin with safety. The TWU agrees that cash remains an important part of Australia's payment system. It is secure, inclusive, and resilient, and still matters in metropolitan, regional, and remote communities. But cash can only remain available if it is moved through a safe, sustainable, and viable system. That requires proper funding, enforceable standards and accountability across the entire supply chain, particularly for the major banks, major retailers and other larger clients whose contracting decisions determine whether operators can invest in safe systems of work. That's why it is the union's view that the specialist road transport jurisdiction of the Fair Work Commission is best placed to set enforceable cash-in-transit supply chain standards that balance the interests of safety, sustainability and viability. The TWU has recently made a contract chain order application under this jurisdiction designed specifically for the cash-in-transit industry. We are gravely concerned that the proposed framework we're here to discuss today creates a new regulatory architecture that risks duplicating, cutting across or undermining any orders made by the Fair Work Commission. The Fair Work Commission is uniquely placed to set enforceable minimum standards for this industry. The TWU's application seeks standards on employee background checks, cash-in-transit training, risk assessments, safe operating procedures, vehicle requirements, staff ratios, firearms and PPE, remuneration, record keeping, auditing, dispute resolution, and importantly, supply chain accountability. These are the controls that determine whether a worker goes home safely at the end of a shift. The safety risks are not abstract. The industry has a long history of armed robberies, assaults and deaths. Cash-in-transit workers have been killed or attacked during cash drops in public places. Recent incidents, including in May 2026, the armed robbery and the assault of 2 workers at a South East Queensland shopping centre, shows that these risks remain real and immediate. When standards fail, the consequences are catastrophic for workers and members of the public nearby. The TWU is particularly concerned that fragmentation will accelerate a race to the bottom. We have seen large amounts of cash moved in non-armoured vehicles by single crew workers without firearms, without specialist equipment and without adequate security systems. These practices may appear cheaper, but the real cost is transferred to workers and the community. Encouraging smaller operators without enforceable safety and funding standards risks rewarding unsafe models and pressuring operators that have invested in armour vehicles, training and security systems and experienced workforces. That is why the TWU says the bill must not override, dilute or create uncertainty around standards made by the Fair Work Commission. The solution we propose is straightforward. The bill should include an express interaction with other laws provision, confirming that to the extent of any inconsistency between a term of a Fair Work order and a standard term or service level standard made under the cash distribution framework, the Fair Work order prevails. This amendment would not frustrate access to cash. It would support it by ensuring the framework operates coherently with the specialist jurisdiction already addressing the industry's most pressing risks. It would provide clarity to operators, clients, workers and regulators and ensure road transport standards are directed to safety, supply chain accountability and the sustainability and viability of the industry cannot be displaced by a broader framework focused only on service levels and market arrangements. In closing, the TWU urges the committee to put safety at the centre of its consideration. The issue is not whether Australians should continue to have access to cash. They should. The issue is whether that access will be delivered through a properly funded, enforceable and safe system for the people who do the work. We ask the committee to recommend the TWU's proposed interaction provision and preserve the primacy of the Fair Work Commission orders for cash-in-transit road transport standards. Thank you, and I welcome any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webb. Senator Little, do you want to go first? Or
I'm happy to go first if you like. I've only got a couple of questions. Yep. Thank you for your evidence today and the information that you provided about the work that those workers do. Is it the union's view that Linfox Armourguard have been unable to pay those workers due to a lack of revenue?
It's not the union's position that they've been unable to pay them. There have been no issues in terms of on-time payments or meeting their existing standards. But as I think it was either Mr. Kelty or Mr. Caulfield in the previous session noted, there has been a real decline in wage growth for these workers. It has been an incredibly stressful and pressing period of time for these workers who have significant uncertainty around the future of their jobs, but also, more importantly, have experienced real wage reductions in what has been a period of significant inflation and cost of living pressures upon those workers. And every time we engage with the business that they are employed by, a particular Linfox Armaguard, whenever we go there and we say, look, there needs to be sustainable wage increases for these workers, the response we are met with is that it is difficult to fund those without there being some significant consequences for the viability of the business. So it's not a matter that they're not being paid, but it is the case that they are not in a position to be able to get real wage growth in circumstances where cost of living is a significant pressure upon them.
Obviously, cost of living and real wage growth is an issue for almost all Australians currently. Does the TWU expect that this bill will actually enhance in any way the pay and conditions for workers? Do you see that as being an outcome of this bill?
Look, it's difficult to ascertain what the outcome of the bill will be, given that what the bill, as I understand it, is trying to do is give powers to the ACCC to determine certain standards, both in the industry but also in the contracts between clients and cash and transit operators. One of the concerns the union has is that some of the considerations of the ACCC will be purely just market and cost implications, which the concern is that would actually place downward pressure on operators, which may also exacerbate their capacity to fund appropriate wage growth for those workers. And in particular, where I think, again, in the previous session, I heard Mr. Kelty say that, and this is in the union submission as well on this bill, is that there is not one mention of safety obligations in this bill and those types of standards that should be imposed upon cash and transit operators. And we at the TWU know that when there are not enforceable safety standards and not enforceable minimum safety standards, that the consequence of that is that operators will cut corners because of the cost pressures that places upon them. And those cutting corners obviously puts workers in a significant safety risk, but it also means that because of those pressures around cost for capital investment or safety standard investment, that those costs are also then transposed on workers' entitlements and wage growth as well. So the concern is that the consideration of the ACCC in making such standards, that a focus would not be on the sustainability or viability or safety for those workers. However, as I said in my opening statement and in our submission, we believe that the Fair Work Commission is an appropriate jurisdiction that would consider such considerations when setting minimum standards, but not just those considerations. If you read the relevant sections of the Fair Work Act and what they must consider, it is not completely indifferent to some of the considerations of the ACCC, but it does also, it doesn't just look at viability of businesses and ensuring that there's fair competition and ensuring that there's not adverse or onerous conditions placed upon operators, big or small, but it has to look at those things in conjunction with safety operations and making sure that businesses are viable and sustainable, which also means promoting appropriate and fair wage growth for workers.
So can you tell me, are enterprise agreements actually tied to the IPM? And if that is the case, what's the consequence of any delay in getting that negotiated?
I'm not privy to the discussions or the arrangements that are being negotiated between Linfox, Armaguard, and those parties involved with the independent pricing mechanism, so it would be inappropriate for me to comment on that. What I can say, though, is that obviously it is important that there is included in any cost requirements or minimum cost obligations placed upon clients that they need to ensure that cash in transit operators are able to meet their industrial relation obligations, and that would include making sure that they are properly funded to ensure that any industrial instrument that applies to them, in this case an enterprise agreement, that they're able to meet their obligations under that. I think the concern, though, is that where we have Linfox, Armaguard, which I think, as was said in the previous session, has an 85% market share, that if there is pressure placed upon them to have to compete with operators who do not have the same level of safety standards as they do, that they are effectively competing on an unlevel playing field. And what that does is it places downward pressure on costs, and it puts downward pressure on industrial arrangements as well, which, as we know, can have dire consequences in an essential service like cash in transit, which is prone to targeting from organised crime. And as I said, as early as May this year, we've seen armed hold-ups. And if safety standards drop because of cost pressures, then that will only be exacerbated, and it won't just be those workers that will be put at risk, but also the general public that are in those areas as well.
Can I ask, were you consulted specifically by the Treasurer or Treasury officials or any relevant government ministers around this draft bill, what it would look like?
I wasn't consulted personally. I might have to take that question on notice, but the union regularly engages with members of government and members of governmental departments, but we did obviously have the opportunity to make our submissions, which we have made, which I understand that you have as well.
Okay, so you'll get back to me on whether there were any direct negotiations between the union and the Treasury and Treasury officials in relation to this bill?
There's no direct negotiation. I think I did have, now that I recall, I did have a session with some members of the Department of Treasury, and that was more about getting an understanding on the union's submission and what our main concerns were, and in particular around the interaction with Fair Work legislation. And that was a short session that I had with some directors from the department, where I just explained through our concerns in our submission and how they might be addressed. If that satisfies your question, then I don't need to take it on notice. So.
Yeah, that's, I think a yes, would agree. Does the TWU expect that banks or taxpayers will be expected to pay more to ensure that this business is viable?
It's not. I think that we shouldn't put a price on safety. If I take the question or the inference of the question correctly, it's actually pivotal to have. It's actually pivotal that this industry can operate safely and viably, and we shouldn't put a price on safety or on people's lives. I'm aware that because of some of the downward pressure being placed upon operators by major banks, that we have seen single crew operators carting millions of dollars of cash in vehicles such as Hyundai i30s and taking millions of dollars of cash in major cities around Australia in those unmarked vehicles and delivering them to retailers. And we understand that that is occurring because major clients, such as banks and retailers, are deciding to use operators with substandard service and safety standards purely on the basis of cost. I've raised these matters previously in the Fair Work Commission. I've given evidence of this to banks, and it's also been included in our submission as well. So I don't think that it's not our expectation that that banks or the public should pay more to make the business viable, but we think that it is an expectation that the industry should be operating safely, and that should cost what it should cost to ensure that workers and also the public are safe as part of its operation.
So that's pretty extraordinary that you would suggest that Hyundai i30s are delivering large amounts of cash to customers. Yep. Who authorised that, and what's been your involvement in raising issues and concerns about that?
Yeah, I'm not aware who authorised it. What I know is that, and these have been included in our submissions. I think we've included the photographs of the vehicles being loaded in cash distribution centres. But I'm not aware. All I'm aware is that through consultation with the industry and also through some workers who work around where those vehicles were being loaded, and after talking to those people that were delivering the cash, that's what occurred. It is extraordinary.
Did you do any investigation into that? It just seems quite... When you are the union representing workers, and that seems to be... You may not represent those workers, but it seems an extraordinary thing to be happening. Did you investigate it at all or seek for that to be investigated?
We have sought for that to be investigated through the client. So we made it known to the who we suspected was the client for which the cash was being delivered upon. We gave them the evidence and we asked them to investigate that to ensure that the operators that they engage to deliver cash on their behalf, and it was one of the major banks, that doesn't occur, and that they engage operators that can operate safely. And we also did ask, as I said earlier, we did engage with some of our members who do work in that centre to find out further information if they could talk to those delivery people. But I'm not sure how many more instances there have been of that since we found out about it. But I suspect that answers your question.
Do you think that's around safety or cost that might have occurred? Can you make a... Yeah. Do you have any insight into that at all, or did you get any information from the client?
No, we didn't get any information from the client about it. I can only imagine. I would be shocked if any responsible corporation knew that was what was going to occur, that they would not engage such operators. But this is the problem, is that because we don't have minimum enforceable standards and we do not have appropriate supply chain accountability, is that these oversights can occur, and essentially clients will purely make decisions based on cost and make assumptions around safety standards, when the reality is that without that oversight, without those minimum enforceable standards around safety and also service levels, this is what can happen. So I suspect that it was that the decision... I can't say, I can't really give the evidence of it other than I would suspect it was made on cost. But that, that any responsible corporation would want to ensure safe delivery of any goods that they are being delivered on their behalf, but without having those safeguards or without having some accountability on supply chain participants to ensure that happens, this is what can happen.
So we heard quite clearly from Mr Fox that they don't like elements of this bill. What does the TWU think about this bill if it was to pass without any amendments?
So I think we've made our position clear in our submissions. We've raised some concerns around different aspects of the bill, but the priority for us and the focus that I would want the committee to have is around the interaction with the Fair Work Commission orders, which is why in our supplementary submission we put forward a proposed amendment in relation to the interaction of any service standards set by standard terms or service level standards set by the ACCC, and ensuring that there is not a regulatory overlap between those two those two, I guess, competing interests between two bodies that would be setting service standards, and that the Fair Work Commission orders, given the fact that they would have consideration to similar considerations to the ACCC, but also at its core must consider safety and also viability and sustainability, that any such orders, if there's an inconsistency, should be paramount.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, Mr. Webb, and apologies for the delay. I mean, first off, your opening statement, I think you gave us a reasonably good overview of the role that your members play in maintaining reliable access to cash across the economy. Thank you on behalf of, I'm sure, the committee in the work that they do. I think you described how incredibly dangerous it can be. It's not a job like any other in terms of the high levels of danger that they can be in. A primary school friend of mine's father used to work for Armour Guard and got shot on the job doing the work that your members do in this space. So can you just, for those kind of playing along at home who might not have a full appreciation, can you just, to be really clear, your members actually drive the trucks, deliver the money, so they are the ones at the front line. And so when you talk about safety, that's really what you're talking about, what their role is. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm talking about, well, the immediate safety risk, obviously, is that they are carting huge amounts of cash and valuables, and they are susceptible to assaults and armed robberies. They are delivering cash in public spaces, shopping centres, banks, and so that is the immediate safety threat that they face, and also obviously the wider public that also participate or are located in close proximity to delivery points for cash in transit workers. So it is correct to identify that it is an incredibly high risk environment where these workers effectively put their lives at risk every single day to perform this work. They're mostly armed as well, and it's not infrequent that they are subjected to armed robberies, attempts or assaults, but also not to dilute other safety concerns as well. It's not just about that immediate safety impact, but also it can even just be things like the high stress environment they work in, the hours that they work, the crewing levels that they have, the vehicle specifications as well, and making sure that proper capital investment is made in vehicles. Even little things such as air conditioning sometimes can be a challenge for these workers who are spending hours upon hours in armoured vehicles. And you want these workers to be at their peak when they are performing this work, and that means because they need to be alert and they need to be aware of their surroundings. So it's not just the immediate risk, but also the other safety aspects as well that I don't think everyone appreciates for any transport workers when they're performing transport work as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so from the TW perspective, how there's been some instability, obviously, in this sector for I guess a little period of time now, with the current legislation being considered, but also the merger. Before that, how is that affecting workers on the ground?
Yeah, it's had a significant impact. I'm actually, one of the reasons I'm appearing today is because I'm effectively the appointed lead official at the union dealing with the cash and transit industry, and I've been directly involved in consulting and working with our members right across the country, pretty much from the date that the merger was first announced between Prosegur and Armour Guard. And I've also led, I guess, the consultation negotiations with Linfox Armour Guard in relation to that process, and also the ongoing pressures that they are facing with their major clients and the independent pricing mechanism process. So I have very first-hand experience of how this has been impacting upon those workers. It has been an incredibly insecure and stressful environment. for about 3 to 4 years now, it could even be longer, I think it's about the time period, these workers have effectively not known whether they're going to have a business that can employ them, at any point, whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, next month. And that's effectively because, from what we understand, that the business is operating at a significant loss. They're not able, and because they are a private business, they could determine to pull the plug at any point in time, notwithstanding that this is an essential service. So that has had a significant impact upon these workers. And then on top of that, as a responsible union, we've been engaging in negotiations for enterprise agreement conditions over this period of time as well. And we've had to make some very difficult decisions and have some difficult discussions with our members right in the middle of a cost of living crisis, where we have to accept certain conditions to ensure the viability of the business. And from what we understand, that is effectively being caused due to downward pressure being placed upon this business through unfair competition practices by other operators, because major clients like the major banks and retailers effectively, have the choice over cost between different operators who might operate under, conditions that are 30 to 40% below what these workers get paid, and then obviously the other issues around capital investment, vehicle and safety standards as well. So that means, as I said to some of the questions from the other senator, means that these workers have experienced mostly negative wage growth over that period of time, and have had to make some difficult decisions. But we've been working very constructively with the business because we know that this is an essential service, and we want to make sure that our members have secure jobs moving forward as well.
Thank you. So I would surmise that from everything that you've said, that it is important that any long-term solution supports both the continuity of service for customers, which delivers long-term job security and a viable industry for your members, but also delivers on a sustainable operating model. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I think that I do agree with that, but one of the shortcomings of the bill from the union's perspective is the lack of focus around safety standards as well, in conjunction with those considerations. And also, I guess, the industrial realities that a body like the Fair Work Commission would have to consider when making relevant orders that perhaps the ACCC would not have consideration of, or at least the bill doesn't mandate that they must have consideration of. So I don't think that they are in contradiction of each other. I think that it's important that in order to have a sustainable and viable cash in transit industry, you shouldn't compromise on safety and industrial standards. So I think that should be the focus.
Thank you. That's all from me. Thank you very much for attending today.
Thank you, Chair.
If there's any questions on notice, you'll get them to respond to.
Senator Darman, can I just get clarification from that question you asked? It's just a very quick question, clarification.
Sure.
You were just saying that you were involved in negotiations on the enterprise agreements. But when I asked you the question, you seem to be unclear about the connection between that and the actual agreement that is the IPM, which I'm just trying to understand which. Are you involved in both of those things?
No, well, they're completely different. They're completely different frameworks and negotiations.
Yep.
And an enterprise agreement is directly between the employer and its employees, which the union is their representative in this circumstance.
And you said you weren't aware of if there was anything related to that in the IPM?
No, I'm not aware. There have been some representations made to us that by the business that obviously there's some kind of cost model that's been developed by Deloitte, and that would ensure that payments that are made from clients to the operator would ensure they can meet their relevant industrial standards. But I think, enterprise agreements happen every 2 to 3 years, and that can change. But I'm not privy to the actual I guess, I don't know if it's a negotiation, but at least the process with Deloitte, the major clients, and Armaguard as to what is in the independent pricing mechanism. I know some very high-level representations have been made to us by the business, but I'm not directly involved in that process. I don't know what's included in the model. I don't have access to any documentation in relation to it, so that's why I gave that answer previously.
But somebody else might within the TWU?
Not in the TWU, I wouldn't think so. No, not within the union,
Okay.
no.
All right, thank you.
That's okay. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. So we will conclude with the TWU and now welcome representatives from the Master Grocers Association. I see, Mr. Sterling, you've been patiently waiting online. Apologies for running a little behind. Hopefully we will catch up, I'm optimistic. So just for people following at home, we will break after this session, which is a little later than we had planned. So I understand that you have been provided with information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate proceedings. I invite you to state your full name and the capacity in which you appear for the Hansard, and then proceed to a short statement. And after that, we can ask you some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Martin Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Master Grocers Australia. Senators, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. MGA represents independent grocery, liquor, timber and hardware retailers across Australia, from substantial independent supermarkets employing hundreds of people to small family-run stores serving communities that may no longer have a bank branch or a nearby post office or any other meaningful alternative to accessing cash. Our members are not simply users of Australia's cash system, they are increasingly important to the infrastructure that keeps functioning in practice. Between 2017 and June 2025, more than 2,489 bank branches closed across Australia, representing a reduction of more than 43% in the national branch network. As those branches have disappeared, the need for communities to access and use cash has not disappeared with them. Instead, much of that responsibility has shifted to supermarkets, post offices, and other local businesses. For many independent supermarkets, particularly in regional and remote communities, that shift has been profound. A supermarket may now be the only place where a customer obtains cash out, breaks a note, accesses change, or continues to transact when digital systems are not available. In some towns, the local retailer has effectively become part supermarket, part community service, and the last remaining point of access to the cash economy. But the retailer didn't choose to replace the bank branch, and it is not funded to perform that role. Every day, MGA members accept cash, provide those cash out services, order notes and coins, hold and secure significant amounts of cash on site, and arrange collections. And much of this work is invisible when the system functions well, but its importance becomes obvious when something goes wrong. If we consider a regional community after a severe storm, where the local bank branch has closed years ago, and the nearest alternative may be an hour or more away drive, in that moment, cash is the most important part to ensure that commerce remains in that economy and remains functional. It may determine whether a family can continue to buy groceries and whether an older person can maintain their independence and whether a local business can continue trading. And independent retailers understand that reality because they experience it directly. When digital systems fail, people turn to cash. They walk into their local supermarket or grocery store and ask whether they can still continue to pay with cash. And for many Australians, particularly older Australians, including those living alone, including Australians living with a disability, people on lower incomes, people experiencing financial hardship, and especially those living in regional and remote communities, cash remains a very important payment preference. It provides autonomy, privacy, and certainty, and in some circumstances is the only practical means of payment available to those persons. And for those reasons, MGA broadly supports the objectives of the legislation that the committee is considering. However, we do urge the committee to assess some very important considerations and principles. Most of those are outlined in our written submissions, and I won't traverse those in detail, but I will highlight the most important ones. Firstly, we say that the framework must preserve affordable access to cash distribution services for Australian businesses. The government should actively monitor whether regulatory and system costs are being materially passed through to business customers and should be prepared to take appropriate action where those costs threaten continued access. Second, service standards must reflect the practical needs of business users, not simply the commercial arrangements between major industry participants. For a family owned retailer, service quality is really measured in straightforward terms: whether the cash arrives when promised, whether collections are completed safely, whether services continue running during disruptions, and whether problems are addressed promptly, and whether there is an effective remedy when agreed standards are not met. Thirdly, regional and remote Australia must remain a priority. We recognise, of course, that servicing remote communities can involve higher transport costs. However, a purely cost to serve approach risks making cash least affordable in the communities that depend upon them most. Cash operates as a national network, and maintaining that network requires shared responsibility across the system. Regional Australians should not lose meaningful access to cash simply because they live further from a metropolitan depot. Fourth, the framework must promote fair commercial outcomes. Independent retailers generally have far less bargaining power than major cash distribution providers, and in some locations may have little or no practical choice of provider. Fifth, the legislation must make clear that ordinary retailers are not inadvertently captured merely because they receive, hold, or store cash as an incidental part of their normal business activities. A supermarket that stores cash overnight, provides cash out, or operates an ATM is not by that fact alone a cash distribution business. There's also an important question of regulatory fairness arising from the interaction between this framework and the new cash acceptance mandate. Where the government requires a supermarket to accept cash, that retailer should not face enforcement action, penalties, or an unnecessarily burdensome exemption process because its cash distribution provider failed to deliver the notes, coins, or services required for compliance. Those two frameworks must operate coherently. Standard terms and service standards should include appropriate warranties, notification obligations, and remedies where a provider's failure affects a business customer's ability to meet statutory cash acceptance obligations. And finally, we say that implementation must involve genuine consultation with businesses that use these services every day. Retailers often see operational problems before they appear in formal reports. They know when services are becoming unreliable, when costs are becoming unsustainable, and which communities are at risk of being left behind. A successful framework will not merely preserve the movement of cash through a national network, but it will ensure that businesses now carrying much of the burden, like independent supermarkets, especially in regional and remote communities, are not accidentally regulated, unfairly penalised, or priced out of performing that role. And most importantly, Senators, it will preserve the ability of Australians to use cash confidently, affordably, and in accordance with personal preference. Thank you. I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks very much. Senator Little, are you happy to go first?
Yes, certainly are. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Sterling. You mentioned how important cash is to your customers, particularly for older Australians and in regional, remote, rural communities. Can you give me a bit of an example of your members are independents? They're effectively the last point in that supply chain for cash. Give me some examples of how people are affected when there is a disruption to the way cash is supplied.
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Senator. MGA's members are predominantly supermarkets that operate under well-known banners like IGA, Foodworks, Spar, Friendly Grocer. around the country. A lot of those retailers are located in suburban, but especially in regional and remote areas. And in some towns, they may be the only supermarket that is operating in those communities, sometimes for a considerable distance. And it is our members' experience that customers, especially in regional communities, prefer to pay for their groceries in cash and use the convenience of the supermarket as a place where they can obtain cash out so that they can pay for services in other nearby businesses. And when there is a disruption to the availability of cash to that supermarket, then that disrupts the entire community that has, through preference and custom, established a dependence on cash. And that is exacerbated, of course, when we have natural disasters. And it is really important that those communities in particular are not penalised for being where they are and still have access to affordable cash services. Unfortunately, we have heard of examples where store owners, in some instances, are putting cash into their own personal vehicles and driving long distances, sometimes hours, to a nearby town so they can access bank branches in those communities because the branches have closed in their own towns. And that, of course, is fundamentally unsafe and not what the owner of a supermarket should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Just want to ask, cash clearly matters to the customers who your members service, but it's your members that are actually paying to be able to do that transaction with cash. Since the mandate started on the 1st of January, what does the compliance cost look like for an independent grocer? And I'm interested in understanding per store per year. If you don't have those figures, I'd really like them on notice. But if you can talk more generally now, that would be great.
I can provide some general commentary, and I may need to take the balance of your question on notice. The cash mandate has largely not affected the independent network because the vast majority of independent supermarket already have arrangements in place to accept cash, and that is the preference of their customers, especially in some regional communities that have a large elderly demographic. There is a very clear preference towards transacting in cash. The costs of the cash acceptance mandate, as I understand it, have not adversely affected independent supermarkets because there hasn't been an additional burden, especially where cash has already been well established in those business operations. However, with further bank branch closures and increasing access to cash distribution providers, those are costs that may come to be realised. There are some niche examples where, particularly in very remote areas and in environments that are inherently seasonal and dependent on tourism traffic, like alpine areas where the snowfields are, or quite remote coastal areas where there has been an additional cost for those businesses in being required to accept cash year round as opposed to just a discrete period in time. But I would have to take that question on notice to provide a more fulsome response.
When the mandate was made, were your members given any assurance that cash delivery would actually be available and be affordable? Did you get any assurances about that?
No, we raised concerns about that. It would have been our preference that the cash distribution framework was legislated and resolved first before the cash mandate came into operation. However, that was not the case.
So what's been the impact of that on your members on doing it that way, rather than the way you would have preferred to see it?
For some of our members, especially those that operate in the snowfields or those coastal communities that are dependent on seasonal tourism traffic, it has created elements of uncertainty about whether they will be able to comply with their statutory obligations to accept cash. Of course, there are exemptions and pathways to seek exemptions under the scheme, but it's yet another anxiety that those businesses have had to confront, especially in an environment where it's already very difficult to operate independent supermarkets.
So we know that your members face civil penalties for not accepting cash, but there's no matching protection when the failure to deliver cash is armour guards. Is that fair, do you think?
Yes, that's been a concern that we've raised in our submission, and which I attempted to raise in my opening remarks. We think that it is fundamentally unfair that a business should be penalised when it is simply not able to comply with its statutory obligations.
So if armour guards costs actually rise under this framework and pass through the banks to retailers, who pays in the end? The grocer, the customer at the checkout? Who pays if costs continue to rise?
Independent supermarket operators are fundamentally part of their communities. So they do what they can to look after their communities. We know, particularly with other costs increases that they've had to face, whether it's labour, energy, insurance, they've done what they can to absorb those costs and reduce their own margins at sometimes severe personal cost. Because they do want to do the right thing by their communities. But of course, there is a limit to how much they can absorb. And it does flow that if they are faced with additional significant cash distribution costs, that those are costs that will have to be passed on to end consumers through higher grocery prices.
Have any regional members lost CIT services or been told they might lose them with the merger or since the merger?
I'm not aware whether any concerns have been raised that can be specifically linked to the merger, but I certainly have heard anecdotally of difficulties in being able to access those services, especially in those regional areas.
And your position would be on this legislation, what amendments would be required for it to have your support?
We already have provided in principle support to the objectives. We think that there should be a framework that regulates the cash distribution industry. But what we would want is stronger safeguards for retailers, especially so that they are not penalised when they cannot accept cash or transact with cash with their customers in circumstances where it is completely outside of their control because they cannot access the cash distribution framework. We would also be seeking protections to ensure that especially smaller businesses, those family-run small businesses, are not disadvantaged because of their relatively small size compared to some of the larger operators that they may be looking to enter into arrangements with. And we certainly would want the legislation to reflect that cash is a public good and it's in the national interest for there to be a consistent pricing framework across the entire economy and that communities are not penalised simply because of where they are located.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go to Senator Walker.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. I just have a couple of quick questions. Would you say that smaller retailers are more exposed when cash distribution services become reliable or expensive?
Apologies, Senator Walker. I think part of your question may have cut out there, but I understand your question is whether small businesses would be disproportionately exposed if cash was to be more expensive.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes to that question. Larger businesses are able to distribute their costs more broadly across their businesses and perhaps explore more creative ways in how they might be able to manage those costs. Smaller operators are far more exposed and vulnerable to any cost increases, including cash distribution.
Thanks. And off of the back of that, do you think that clearer standard terms and dispute pathways could help small retailers manage cash distribution arrangements?
Yes, and it's especially important that there be very clear, easy to use, effective, and affordable options to manage disputes and to seek enforcement of those terms, especially in circumstances where small businesses have a business model that is really dependent on cash.
Okay, thanks. That's all from me. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. You've helped us catch up on some time. So we can let you go now. Thank you for joining us this morning. We will now suspend for a short break and return at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
and the Customer-Owned Banking Association, and I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? And perhaps we'll go to the Customer-Owned Banking Association first.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Elliott and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Customer-Owned Banking Association, or COBA.
Hello, Senators. I'm Robert Thomas, Senior Manager Policy at the Customer-Owned Banking Association.
And Simon Birmingham, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Banking Association.
And Ali Beglari, Policy Director, ABA.
Thank you very much. Do you both have an opening statement that you'd like to share before we go to questions? I see Ms. Elliott nodding. Would you like to go first?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for inviting the Customer-Owned Banking Association to provide input to this inquiry. Today, we are representing 47 customer-owned banks that collectively serve more than 5.4 million Australians. I'm appearing on behalf of our CEO, Michael Lawrence, as COBA is currently hosting 2,500 delegates from 40 countries at the World Credit Union Conference in Sydney. Last year's global conference was hosted in Sweden, a nation frequently cited as one of the world's most cashless societies. However, following geopolitical tensions in Europe, Sweden's central bank recently recommended that every household maintain a physical cash reserve for times of crisis. When that advice was issued, one of the biggest challenges for many Swedes was simply finding a place to access cash. The global lesson is clear. In a digital-first society, cash remains an essential fallback. It supports community resilience, continuity, and preparedness when digital systems are disrupted. There is, of course, no doubt that Australians are changing the way they pay, with everyday cash transactions continuing to decline. And for a country as geographically dispersed as Australia, that shift is fundamentally challenging the economics of keeping cash circulating. But the decline in transactions does not diminish the importance of cash as a cornerstone of the Australian economy. This is especially true in regional and remote Australia, where customer-owned banks have a significant presence. Nearly 3/4 of our member banks are headquartered outside Sydney and Melbourne, in communities ranging from Townsville to Broken Hill. RBA data confirms that cash use is particularly high in these areas, where communities frequently navigate unreliable digital infrastructure and power outages. In towns such as Holbrook in New South Wales and Weipa in far north Queensland, customer-owned banks are often the only providers of full-service banking, including essential cash deposit and withdrawal services. The importance of cash is also tied to our sector's long-standing commitment to financial inclusion. Traditional Credit Union is a clear example. As Australia's only Indigenous-owned bank, it operates in 14 locations across the Northern Territory, 12 of which are remote Indigenous communities. More broadly, around 1 in 5 Australians are digitally excluded, and rates of exclusion are highest among people aged 75 and over, people who did not complete secondary school, public housing residents, and First Nations people. For these Australians, as well as regional communities, cash is not simply a preference, it is a necessity. For all these reasons, COBA strongly supports the cash distribution framework legislation and supports its timely passage. We welcome the government's decision to regulate the cash distribution system in the public interest and support the objective of ensuring pricing and service arrangements are fair, reasonable, transparent and non-discriminatory, particularly in a highly concentrated cash in transit market. We were encouraged by Armaguard's evidence this morning that its board is expected to meet next week to finalise the long-awaited independent pricing mechanism. However, we also note its evidence that several key elements underpinning the mechanism remain unresolved or have led to delays, including issues relating to price allocation. These matters are critically important to our members because they will directly affect the cost, availability and relative pricing of cash services across Armaguard's customer base. The lodgement of the independent pricing mechanism will be a significant milestone, as customer-owned banks have not yet had access to the mechanism to assess its detail. COBA has consistently advocated for a transparent and meaningful consultation process, and we look forward to engaging constructively once the proposal is available. Ultimately, it is essential that the pricing framework delivers fair and sustainable outcomes for all participants in the cash system, including customer-owned banks, which do not have the negotiating leverage of larger institutions. And as per our submission, while we support the flexibility provided to the Reserve Bank to respond to developments in the cash system, we encourage the committee to ensure the framework is not interpreted in a way that could capture ordinary banking activities, such as operating branches, within a regime that is intended for systemically significant cash distribution providers. We also believe smaller institutions need practical access to dispute resolution. COBA would welcome confirmation that multiple affected entities can pursue collective arbitration where they face common conduct from a designated provider. This would help ensure customer-owned banks can effectively enforce their rights without being deterred by the cost of individual arbitration. Finally, we support the transitional powers proposed for the ACCC. With the Armaguard undertakings expiring in September, these powers will be important in managing risks arising during the transition period and ensuring continuity of cash services. Thank you, and we would welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. The representatives from the ABA?
Thanks, Chair, Senators. It's good to be able to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity to appear alongside our friends and colleagues at COBA today. The cash distribution framework bills are a critical step to provide security to the long-term availability of cash in Australia. Our written submission sets out our position in detail, but today I do wish to focus on a few key points. The banking industry is committed to ensuring that Australians who wish to use cash can continue to do so. And you just heard some very good reasons from COBA as to why. Cash remains an essential payment option for many Australians. But like many other economies around the world, Australia has seen a rapid shift to tap and go and digital payments as the preferred way for millions of people to transact. This customer change sped up at pace during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2007, 70% of payments across Australia were paid for with cash. Today, it is just around 15%. Understandably, this dramatic drop in the volume of cash used placed pressures on the businesses of those who logistically move cash around our economy, cash in transit operators. These pressures emerged at a time when the two largest cash in transit businesses in Australia merged, creating a virtual monopoly. When these pressures on cash distribution became apparent, the four major banks, our retail partners, all stepped up in the national interest to ensure the security of cash distribution. Since June of 2024, the ABA has coordinated Australia's four major banks, CBA, Westpac, NAB and ANZ, together with Australia Post, Coles, Wesfarmers and Woolworths, in providing more than $100 million of additional funding to Linfox Armaguard to ensure the continuity of cash distribution. To be clear, such has been their commitment to keep cash available around Australia, these 8 companies have voluntarily paid more than $100 million to another company, Linfox Armaguard, over and above their negotiated contract terms. This interim financial support has been provided on the understanding that LFA would work with the 8 funding parties to develop a long-term solution, namely an independent pricing mechanism that would then properly be subject of public consultation through ACCC processes and approvals. The purpose of the IPM is to ensure, firstly, the long-term sustainability of Linfox Armaguard by guaranteeing the full funding of their efficient costs and a reasonable rate of return. Secondly, that all Linfox Armaguard customers have transparent and formula-based pricing comparable to regulated pricing in other monopolistic sectors. And thirdly, affordable access to cash services right across the Australian economy, like a local pub or club, service station or chemist, particularly in regional and remote areas. Final terms of the IPM were independently developed and settled by Deloitte earlier this month on the 7th of July. The ABA and 8 funding party companies have made clear their acceptance of this independent work, even though it would significantly increase the ongoing future costs for these companies. We have and continue to urge Linfox Armaguard to urgently update the draft ACCC application lodged last December and to lodge a final application as soon as possible. ACCC processes will then quite rightly provide all other customers, including our other members and COPUS members and other stakeholders, the opportunity to comment on the IPM and the ACCC's eventual approval. I note Mr Bill Kelty's evidence that lodgement will be a matter of discussion at Linfox Armaguard's board meeting next week, and urge them to act quickly to create long overdue certainty on cash distribution and to lodge that final application. The ABA, our members and other retail funding parties to this process also support the proposed legislation before this committee today and see it as a critical safety net to guarantee cash distribution and availability in Australia. The Reserve Bank quite rightly holds numerous emergency or contingency powers to enable them to prevent and or respond to different types of financial crises. Creating similar powers to protect cash distribution is prudent and necessary in this new environment where the dramatic drop in cash use and emergence of a virtual monopoly provider for cash distribution means the market can no longer be relied upon to guarantee the fair, affordable and reliable distribution of cash. A permanent legislative framework is important to provide regulatory certainty, ensure fair and sustainable pricing, guarantee service standards, especially in regional and remote areas, and establish clear crisis preparedness arrangements. The transitional provisions in these bills are equally important, and their passage arguably even more urgent given Linfox Armaguard's ACCC enforceable undertakings, which have provided important pricing and service protection since their 2023 merger with Prosegur, which will expire, though, in September of this year. These bills achieve the right balance and are the outcome of years of work, including extensive public consultation. I note earlier questions from senators and comments from other witnesses about the extent of consultation and draw senators' attention to the June 2025 Council of Financial Regulators options paper for a regulatory regime for cash distribution, the March 2026 Council of Financial Regulators conclusions paper recommending a legislated regulatory framework, and Treasury's public consultation on an exposure draft bill through April and May of this year. The results of these extensive consultations are proposed powers independently applied by the Reserve Bank and ACCC, modelled on established regulatory frameworks that would apply only where those independent financial regulators deem intervention to be necessary. Senators' expeditious passage of these bills is warranted, prudent and necessary. We therefore encourage the committee to recommend that the bills be passed as a priority and look forward to taking questions.
Thank you very much. We will kick off with questions, but could I ask each of you to share a copy of your opening statements with the Secretariat so that we can incorporate those into Hansard and also reference them both in our deliberations? Thank you. And I will go to Senator Little for questions.
Thank you. Thank you to all witnesses. I'll go first to the Customer-Owned Banking Association. You've explained how important cash is to your members' customers. Were customer-owned banks in the room when the pricing mechanism was negotiated between Armaguard and its 8 biggest customers?
Thank you, Senator. No, we were not in the room. What I will say at the outset, I would like to acknowledge the work that the Australian Banking Association, the major banks and the other funding parties have done. We recognise that there has been an injection in the order, as the CEO of the ABA has said, of $100 million. That is not an insignificant amount of funding, and we are mindful that the broader banking and retail sector has benefited from that investment. I think at this point, our main concern is that the IPM does become public so that we can be confident that the members of our industry association that do not enjoy the negotiating power of perhaps some of the other customers of Armaguard are provided for in that pricing mechanism.
So you're asking about the independent pricing mechanism, but I want to go to the ACCC's June 25 conditions that require Deloitte to consult with customer-owned banking before any in-principle agreement. Did that actually happen?
Senator, was not in this particular role at that point in time, so I would need to make some inquiries to understand exactly what the consultation was. I understand that there was a meeting with Deloitte, but I do not have visibility of the extent of that consultation. It's not been something I've personally been involved in.
Right. If you could please provide that on notice. Under the standard terms this bill sets up, do you understand that your members will pay the same unit prices as the majors or worse? What's your understanding about where you will land on this in terms of practical outcome?
So in relation to the IPM, we do not have visibility of that. In relation to the bill itself, the bill essentially sets up a framework for the ACCC to then provide further specificity in relation to pricing and service levels. So we don't have visibility of the detail at this point. I'll just defer to my colleague. Would you like to add anything on that point?
I think Ms Elliott has covered this well, Senator. Our understanding is ACCC will consult on these aspects of its standards, service standards, and at that time we would be able to have more visibility of what would be the final service standards for any designated entity.
Right. Okay. When are you expecting to get access to the detail of the IPM? What's your understanding when you'll get that?
The latest information we have is the evidence that Armaguard provided this morning, which indicated that it would be going to the board next week. If that is the case, we would hope that the lodgement with the ACCC would follow shortly after, and then that would be the point at which we would be examining the proposal. We have had some discussions with the ACCC in relation to our desire to ensure that there is a suitably comprehensive period of time for us to be able to examine this, because at the moment we do have information asymmetry and we will be starting from an earlier starting point than others who are looking at the same proposal. So I don't know the exact timing, but we would hope that it would follow shortly after the board's consideration next week.
Okay. I know you recognise the contribution of the ABA. I'm just interested in whether you would support the bill as it currently stands, or what amendments you would be seeking that respond to your particular characteristics of your members' businesses.
No, thank you, Senator. There are two elements. So broadly, we are very supportive of the bill. We think it is well drafted and it is a comprehensive response to the issues at hand. The two issues that we have raised in our submission relate to the meaning of a cash distribution service and the provision for arbitration under the bill. Section 6 of the bill specifies what a cash distribution service is, and subsection 3 provides that a cash distribution service also includes a service that relates to cash or the availability of cash and is specified by the rules for the purposes of this paragraph. And we consider that to be a very broad power for rulemaking to designate additional entities, and we would just seek confidence that that would not ultimately be used to designate other ordinary banking activities such as the operation of branches. Now, we understand the reason why this is in here is because we don't know how the cash industry will ultimately evolve. It is possible that at some point in the future where Armaguard no longer to continue, that there could be some kind of either government or private industry entity that would take on the cash distribution role. And so the Act has been drafted in a way that contemplates that, and we appreciate and support that. But we are just mindful that it is quite a broad rulemaking power. The second element is in relation to the arbitration provisions. The Act provides that entities can seek arbitration, the ACCC can appoint an arbitrator, and it provides for a default position where each entity seeking arbitration funds 50% of the cost. So if you have two entities, it's 50% each. We're just very mindful that Armaguard has, as I mentioned this morning, 1,300 customers. We represent close to 50 banks. Some of those banks are far smaller than Armaguard, so it could be that the costs of arbitration split on a 50-50 basis would operate as a disincentive to taking advantage of those provisions, and that instead a bank might choose to accept what it sees as commercially unfair terms. So we feel that a potential solution could be to allow banks to collectively apply for arbitration where the issues are substantially similar and could more efficiently be dealt with together.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do is just ask all our questions of COBA, and then we'll rotate again to go to ABA. So I've just got a couple for COBA. In your opening statement, you talked a little bit about the need for transparency around pricing. So can you just talk a bit more about what you see as the kind of challenge for smaller financial institutions around the vulnerability to unfair or opaque distribution arrangements for cash, and how that impacts?
Thank you, Chair. Look, at smaller institutions, you just do not have the negotiating power of the larger counterparts. So our largest bank is about 2 to 3% of the market share of the largest bank in Australia. So you can see the relative size difference there. And so what we would be looking for through both the IPM and the ACCC's regime that it sets up under the bill is a level of transparency where we could be confident that by virtue of the size of our banks, we're not disadvantaged in terms of pricing. We recognise that this service costs money, and we recognise that it does need to be done on a commercial basis, so we don't resile from that. But we would welcome additional transparency in relation to how those costs are distributed across Armaguard's entire customer base.
Thank you. And you talked about dispute resolution as well. So I just wanted to talk a bit more about that. Having ACCC oversight of this, would this help? Like, I'm assuming this is going to help support fair access for your members. So just wondered if you wanted to make any additional comments around, what that could look like, and the importance of the standard terms around these things.
Yes, and we have been encouraged by our preliminary discussions with the ACCC. We think that they do appreciate the potential disadvantage by virtue of negotiating power and information asymmetry, and so we are hopeful that will materialise in a kind of robust consultation process. I'll just defer to my colleague. Would you like to add any points specifically on the ACCC's powers?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Zellian. What we would just say is that we are, to reinforce what Ms. Elliott has said, we are very appreciative of the work the ACCC has already done and are pleased by the remarks they've told us. We also do believe that hopefully the service standards that are prescribed by the ACCC will go most of the way to addressing our concerns in this space. But if there is some capacity for ACCC to oversight, so even into the suggestion that we are making about around collective arbitration efforts, it would be appreciative if the ACCC, and we believe it'd be appropriate for them to have some oversight of that to be able to approve, say, for example, our members collectively arbitrating the issue. And so we would think that would be a positive development.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. That was all my questions for COBA. Senator Little, do you want to kick off with ABA?
Thank you. Yes, I will. Mr. Birmingham, your members have put real money into keeping Armaguard afloat. Can you walk the committee through what has been contributed and why it was judged necessary to do that?
Thanks, Senator. As I indicated in the opening statement, our members are committed to seeing cash availability across Australia and recognise the importance of that, especially across rural, regional and remote Australia. As I've also indicated, there were sort of two converging factors that occurred during and around the COVID time. One was the dramatic decline and drop in cash utilisation across Australia, which in practical terms means that for a business like Armaguard, there's less demand for the cash, there are fewer volumes being distributed across the country. And then we also saw the merger of two main cash in transit operators in Australia, Armaguard and Prosegur, into the one entity. Shortly after that merger and the ACCC's approval of it and application of conditions and enforceable undertaking attached to it, Armaguard then raised concerns about the viability of their business. And those concerns created a threat that was recognised by government and regulators and by industry that perhaps cash distribution could be disrupted. And so our major members, we have members who are not part of the funding parties, but our four major members, together with the four retail entities in Woolworths, Coles, Wesfarmers and Australia Post, agreed ultimately to step up and signed and entered into a short-term financial contribution deed between the 8 of them and Armaguard, Linfox Armaguard, that has subsequently been extended twice, and that contribution deed, through its extension period, has seen more than $100 million paid directly from those 8 funding party companies to Linfox Armaguard to sustain their operations over and above the normal bilateral contract terms that those 8 companies have as customers of Linfox Armaguard, who of course get cash distributed across the country. I'd also note that those 8 companies have also funded, to a very large degree, the Deloitte's work and other advisory work to develop the IPM and to try to secure the long-term financial security as well. Short-term funding was always, as per its description, seen as short-term interim emergency funding to keep cash flowing around the economy. The IPM has been intended to be a sustainable long-term arrangement that following proper ACCC processes should give everybody confidence.
We've heard from Linfox board or Linfox this morning that their board is considering the IPM next week. What difference will that make and how important is the timing of that?
We wish that the IPM could have been finalised and implemented earlier. It has been a long process for its development. I do wish to just reflect, Senator, in your question to Kova before, you phrased it as being negotiated between the funding parties and Linfox Armaguard. The IPM hasn't been negotiated. It has been independently developed by Deloitte's. Yes, there's been a contestability during that independent development to make sure that it meets the different objectives, but the intent was always for it to be an independent pricing mechanism, developed firstly independently by Deloitte's, and then ultimately independently approved and tested by the ACCC through their public processes. We certainly now wish to see Linfox Armaguard, if they have that board meeting next week, give immediate approval to a lodgement of a final application so that COBA and their members, the residual of our members, other retailers across the country, all then get the transparency to see how this model works, the fairness that is intended to underpin it in terms of the way it is structured in a consistent and transparent way, and ultimately Linfox and their employees get certainty that there is an enduring funding model for their operations into the future as well.
All right. Thank you for clarifying those points. How does the bill actually improve the economics of cash distribution in Australia?
Well, Senator, the bill ultimately provides a framework firstly, and it will be for the Reserve Bank and the ACCC to determine the extent to which they designate under the bill and the extent to which they apply powers under the bill in terms of pricing and service standards. But what it does do is ensure that if those independent regulators choose to act and act in a comprehensive way, it will apply essentially a guarantee, much as the IPM is intended to do, that the fair costs of Armaguard would be met and that a fair return for their owners would be achieved. And that has been guiding principle of the way the IPM has been developed, and that ultimately is embedded in terms of ensuring that whoever is distributing cash across Australia needs obviously to have their costs met, and if it is owned by private investors, needs to have a fair return on that investment. That's recognised and accepted by all. It's a matter as to how you get there. It doesn't change the volume of cash that would actually be used, but it does provide a framework and a pricing model that will adapt to however those volumes adapt. If cash use goes up, well, then that, of course, will make the business more viable and potentially change what funding models look like. If it goes down further, well, then that also will ultimately increase costs on those who are seeking to get cash to different points in the market.
So Lynn Fox was clear about the concerns it had about the crisis powers and its preference for the pricing mechanism. Can you give us an indication of the bill as it currently stands? Would you be seeking, from your perspective, any amendments to that? Where do you see some of the problems with the bill as it currently stands?
The ABA doesn't propose any amendments to the bill, Senator. However, I note the two particular precise amendments that COBA have proposed, notwithstanding their overall support, and the one particular amendment that the Transport Workers Union have proposed. We are certainly happy to take on notice our views in relation to those three proposals and to come back to the committee in short order as to how we might see them interacting. But at surface level, none of them would impede the ultimate objectives of the bill, which are to provide, when it comes to cash distribution, the same type of emergency powers and reserve powers that the Reserve Bank has, for example, in relation to the Australian Stock Exchange and clearance and settlement systems across the financial system. That ultimately the Reserve Bank has these contingency powers in place in a number of areas where there is an identified risk that if something goes wrong, they need to be able to ensure that the vulnerabilities are addressed. And as I said, with the changed market environment, not as much cash being used and a near monopoly provider now relied upon by all, it is prudent for the Reserve Bank to have the same type of powers to address potential emergencies or difficulties in this part of the financial system as well.
So, Mr. Birmingham, I just want to stick to the crisis powers. The explanatory memorandum says taxpayer crisis funds are expected to be recovered from major users. My understanding is that would be your members. Is there any clause in the bill that actually requires that recovery?
I understand that the powers are established through the bill for that recovery. Ultimately, how that was applied would then, as my understanding, be determined by the regulators, RBA and ACCC, under their respective powers established. Ultimately, we are paying for this service at present. It is paid for by all 1,300 Linfox Armaguard customers through their bilateral contracts they have currently, plus the additional contribution that the 8 customers are making under the short-term funding contribution deed.
So, in your view, should the Section 160 instrument, which allows for up to $400 million in taxpayer funding for a crisis event, be disallowable? It doesn't entirely give you any certainty because there's no indication of how many times that can be applied.
Well, Senator, as I just indicated, I think the powers are there to recover costs associated with an intervention and a framework or the distribution of cash occurring. Major banks already pay the major share of cash contribution alongside the major retailers, and all other customers pay their share. So this would be, in a sense, is a safeguard provision for taxpayers that cost would not shift onto the taxpayer and would be met by those who essentially demand the distribution of cash to their outlets, including a government business enterprise like Australia Post, that we all share in that. In terms of a question of whether it is disallowable or not, I think that is obviously ultimately one for the Senate, but it is, we understand and acknowledge the fact that government doesn't want an environment where there might be a cost shift onto government, and expects that those who currently pay for cash distribution through commercial arrangements and the extra $100 million we've provided over and above those commercial arrangements would continue to pay for cash distribution if government had to intervene. And that is accepted certainly by funding parties and our members.
So I just want to go to the lack of detail. Would the ABA support a statutory cost recovery mechanism? So it should be in the legislation, so your members actually know the rules right up front in advance and not in a crisis. Would that be a better mechanism?
I think, Senator, it would be very hard to write in statute what that cost recovery would actually look like without knowing the extent of intervention or action that regulators actually chose to undertake. And there is not a single foreseeable pathway in the future here. There are a multitude of potential pathways that the ACCC may choose to take if the RBA has designated Linfox Armaguard under the Act, should it be passed, and then the ACCC determines the extent of those powers. So what the costs are and how they might be applicable to different parts of the cash distribution system are varied, and so I don't think it would be possible to adequately prescribe them in current terms.
One of the submissions says that banks that kept branches and AGMs carry more of the cash burden than banks that actually retreated. Should contributions under this framework reflect what each institution actually does for cash access and not just volume?
Again, Senator, I think it's important in this space to recognise that any costs that are incurred by the Commonwealth as a result of emergency interventions are about emergency interventions the Commonwealth would undertake to step in and ensure cash was available to those who currently have commercial terms for cash distribution. That's a prudent thing for the Commonwealth to have those powers, as we've argued, and the way in which those costs might be recovered into the future would most logically reflect the customer base as it existed. And I think there might be other issues that can be discussed around different market relativities, but right now those who wish and need to purchase cash through the system pay to purchase that cash through the system, pay to have it distributed to their bank branch or their post office or their retailer or their pub or club. And this really is just a cost recovery mechanism to make sure that taxpayers were not out of pocket if they had to step in, government had to step in and fill a void in some way created by a collapse in the market.
This is my last question. Linfox Armaguard is essentially a monopoly over cash controlled by a family business. This bill would provide powers for the RBA to intervene in a crisis, but does the ABA think there is any merit in ensuring more representation on the board than currently is?
Lynn Fox Armagard, as you heard from Mr. Fox earlier, substantially owned by the Lynn Fox Group, but also partly owned by Prosegur. Their commercial board terms are a matter for them. I don't think we would be advocating for that type of intervention in terms of board structures or the like. What we do advocate for is transparency. That's why the IPM that we sought to have developed was always intended to be an IPM approved by the ACCC, made transparent and consulted on through the normal ACCC processes to give that transparency. In many ways, as a model, it inverts some of the previous market conditions. The previous market conditions did see the biggest customers have the market power in terms of their bilateral negotiations with Lynn Fox Armagard. The IPM actually provides a transparent, formula-based pricing regime where, in fact, in one part of that detail around how the fixed costs of Lynn Fox Armagard's network are shared, would see those major customers pay a greater share of those fixed costs. And so those matters, no doubt, will all be tested quite appropriately by the ACCC if, when, and hopefully Lynn Fox Armagard submit the final application.
Thanks for that, Senator Little. Just a couple of questions from me. I mean, I think you talked just in terms of the ongoing role that banks have in ensuring Australians have access to cash. I think you've outlined really well, the demonstration of your commitment to that in terms of the participation in the IPM negotiations, short-term funding, the Deloitte work on pricing, and the kind of working group that's ongoing on this matter. But I wondered if you could just talk a bit more about this ongoing role with respect to regional communities in particular and how you see the bank's role there.
Sure, Senator. And cash availability is important for all the reasons we've discussed. In terms of, I guess, the step after actually physically getting it out to regional communities, the trucks, the cash in transit distribution businesses that get it there is who is then making it available and how it is available. There are a number of things that I can highlight there. The expansion of bank participation in the Bank at Post network has been an important development in recent years, ensuring that more banks, essentially now all of the major banks and many of the smaller banks and COBA members across the country have contracts with Australia Post, ensuring that cash distribution happens through all of their outlets. The ABA actually administers a fee-free ATM program across remote Indigenous communities in Australia, where our members through us have contracted to have fee-free ATMs, usually in Indigenous-owned community stores in remote communities, to ensure that cash access is available there. A number of our members currently have an ACCC application to also trial a new model for ATM access across 20 sites that, again, they have identified as having a lack of that fee-free bank-owned ATM network in place. And, of course, the major banks have moratorium in place in relation to branch closures. We are cognizant that that expires next year and are working through the types of processes to look beyond that moratorium as to how we ensure not just that cash availability, which through all of those things I've just spoken about remains quite widespread across Australia, but also face-to-face services remain accessible wherever they possibly can be in a reasonable and viable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess just finally, I mean, I think this has been, I think it's well articulated, but, just thinking about this in a systemic context, that access to cash depends on a sustainable distribution system, not just bank branches and ATMs and your members, I guess, but, we heard this morning from Lynn Fox in terms of their, top 10 customers. It's, the Coles and Woolies. It's the broader systemic ecosystem that we are looking at here and seeking to secure. That is how we're looking at it, and that I guess I'm just confirming this is how you see this, where this legislation fits, and why it's so important as well.
That's right, Senator. I mean, I do want to use that opportunity to acknowledge and pay tribute to Australia Post and the 3 retail partners through this journey, Woolworths, Coles and Wesfarmers, because it's been unusual for them to work so closely with the ABA. 4 major banks have a lot of acknowledged responsibility across the Australian economy, and they take it seriously. And of course, they would step up in these circumstances. But for the retailers and Post to do so together has been a unique partnership and an important one through this journey. But everybody wants the long-term certainty. When you boil it all down, for cash to get from the mint, distributed through the country and into, whether it's a Indigenous community store that I referenced before, pubs or clubs, retail shops, bank branches, credit unions across the country, cash has got to be physically moved to get there. Unlike digital banking, this is an essential part of how the cash network operates. And we used to be able to rely upon the market to do that. But now that there are fewer people using cash and fewer volumes of cash being moved around, those market conditions have changed dramatically. It needs a long-term solution. And essentially there is a belt and braces opportunity here. We still hope and urge Lynn Fox Armagard to proceed with the independent pricing mechanism to get that into the ACCC, and perhaps that will provide the long-term model for how these issues are addressed. But we are also incredibly cognizant that their ACCC undertakings expire in September of this year. Those ACCC processes will not be completed by then, clearly. And so this legislation provides both a long-term safety net, but also the Transitional Measures Bill provides short-term opportunities to make sure that everybody can have confidence that cash is there between now and September, after September, and well and truly in the long run.
Thank you. That's all from me. So thanks very much for your time. Apologies again for delaying your day, but you can get on with it now. And we will move to our last set of witnesses for the day. So I invite the representatives from the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and Treasury to join us, and we'll just wait a minute until those witnesses can assemble. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I think everyone's getting themselves sorted. So I welcome representatives from the RBA, the ACCC and Treasury. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, I will ask each of you to state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today. And I'll start on the screen first, if you'd like to kick us off. Sorry, on the screen, that's those participating remotely. We're all on screen, but yes, the RBA representatives, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Bradley Jones, Assistant Governor for the Financial System at the Reserve Bank of Australia.
And Ellis Connolly, Head of the Payments Policy Department at the Reserve Bank of Australia.
Thank you. And those in the room in Canberra, start from whichever direction you like.
Catherine Brandt, Director, Law Division and Treasury.
Simeon, Director.
I just lost sound. Maybe do you want to start again, Ms. Brandt?
Thank you. Catherine Brandt, Director, Law Division.
No, I can't hear you. Senator, can others who are not in Canberra hear? Okay, it's just me. Well, why don't you keep going and I will try and sort this sound issue out.
Simeon, Director, Financial System Division.
I can hear you now, sorry.
Commonwealth Treasury.
Tim Baird, Assistant Secretary of the Banking and Capital Markets Branch in Treasury.
Good afternoon, Chair. Gina Cascotley, Chair of the ACCC.
Nicole Ross, Executive General Manager of the ACCC's Infrastructure Division.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have a short opening statement that they would like to make before we move to questions?
No, Chair.
I'll go to the RBA first. Do you have an opening statement?
No, Chair.
No. Treasury representatives?
No, Chair.
And ACCC?
No, Chair.
Alrighty, let's kick it off then. Senator Little, over to you.
Thank you. I've got some questions for the ACCC. Ms. Cass-Gottlieb, the Commission was handed a genuinely difficult choice in 2023, 2 loss-making providers and a merger that would create a monopoly controlled by one family. Take the committee through how the Commission weighed some of those considerations at that time.
Thank you very much, Senator. You're right, it was a genuinely difficult question. It was brought to us as an application for merger authorisation, and fortunately that allows us to look not only at competitive detriments but also public benefit. What was clear after quite extensive investigation, including examination of senior executives of both parties, was that we were facing a situation of the lack of viability of the 2 operations and the real prospect that Prosegur would leave Australia and we would result in a very disorderly and uncertain exit from the services that were being provided. We then commenced negotiation of the undertaking, which, as well described by Armagard, obliged continuation of services in every postcode area then provided by the 2 parties under guaranteed terms and conditions, price and non-price, with a cap upon price increase for 3 years. So we ultimately decided on the basis and of the investigation that we would maintain services to deliver this essential service, being cash, that it would be on known and transparent terms and conditions, and I know the submissions to this process across the sector has shown that has been important. And also we were hopeful that within 3 years there would be developed for the medium to long term a regulatory framework to continue to provide fair, reasonable, transparent and non-discriminatory access, and that is what the ACCC considers this regime delivers.
Thank you. I just want to go to the ACCC's reaction when just 1 month after that decision, the merged entity was seeking further funding, and whether there was any indication to the ACCC or whether this was expected or unexpected.
It was not represented to us during the application that the merger, it was represented the merger would allow the opportunity for greater efficiencies and cost savings and for better planning into the future. It was not represented it would be the full solution, though, Senator. And it was also clear that circumstances were changing rapidly. So while it was not apparent to us that the problems would manifest as distinctly as they did within that time frame, it is correct, as stated by Armagard earlier today in this hearing, that it was not represented that the merger was the full solution.
Okay. I think most Australians would think that it's certainly not ideal or reasonable for organisations making representations to get deals and then reneging on them after the fact. Was the financial position of both of those entities accurately represented to the ACCC during that process? And have you done any examination of how that's actually occurred or why that occurred?
We do. There was a very careful examination, including of the most senior executives. I think they did, it must be said, present also in a situation of rapid change occurring, which they were not necessarily entirely across themselves, frankly, Senator. We were concerned that the sector was going to face a very disrupted period, and in that context it was why we were very careful to be very specific about the terms of the continuity of service and pricing, because we were so concerned about that. I do not think that I can say that they misrepresented the position to us. I do not believe at this point in time they fully understood the situation themselves.
Given what you know now, if you could go back in time, would you still approve this merger?
Yes, because I think it was essential to manage in an orderly fashion, which the undertaking did, the first step in a restructure. And I think this legislative regime is essential to manage the next period that will take place, and to hopefully, and I'm sure you will ask questions about it, we do consider there is the right balance of oversight and ability to approve applications, taking into account the public interest, the customer interest, the legitimate business interests of any designated parties. We think it is the right structure in which to achieve in the public interest, including for remote and regional communities, which we are particularly concerned about, fair, reasonable, transparent and non-discriminatory terms.
Can I ask, did the ACCC think it was likely the merged entity would need further funding before it allowed this merger?
That was not a consideration. That was not put before us, no. But however, as I said originally, Senator, it was not put to us that the merger was the full solution.
Has the ACCC provided any advice to the government on potential alternatives? For example, requiring divestiture or breaking up of Armagard?
No, we have not.
Would the ACCC support the breakup of Armagard, and does this legislation actually allow that?
The ACCC supports the use of the powers we hope to receive, as was referred to earlier in the testimony by Armagard, that we do receive the independent pricing mechanism and the model as soon as possible. We want to commence broad consultation on it. We are aware, as Koba said, but that the whole range of medium-sized and smaller customers have not had visibility of it. We want to commence analysis of it, and in that circumstance, and Senator, you'll be aware, we do regulate a range of monopoly, highly concentrated sectors, including rail, telecommunications, the national broadband network, and importantly included in telecommunications there are private sector corporations like Telstra, TPG and Optus, and we regulate price and non-price terms at an access level and service standards level. So we do consider this can be done to achieve efficient operation, continuing investment and long-term economic viability, where the critical interest is the public interest. We are well aware that there is a reasonably high degree across a range of sectors of our community reliance upon cash, and it's very important to do so. There is also the possibility that there may be, in some areas, industry initiatives that will allow greater efficiencies and that will allow more resilience as well. All of that is open, we consider, in the powers that are sitting here under the Act.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question. I may drop out because of a technical issue that's beyond my control. But so what I heard from you was the ACCC allowed this merger without thinking further funding would be necessary at the time, but were also not surprised by the request for further funding. If you can answer that, and does the ACCC view Armaguard as a monopoly? You can answer that separately. And do they have the same disclosure requirements as other monopolies, for example, around their financial disclosures? And I just say I'm probably going to drop out, but I'm certainly interested in your response being on record.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. So you described my answers in your first part of the question correctly. Yes, I do consider that Armaguard is a practical monopoly. On the basis of the submission Armaguard gave to the consultation that we did with the CFR agency, they described that they were 90% of national supply, and today it was said to be 85 to 90%. One of the many important aspects of this bill is it will require much more transparency if Armaguard is to be designated by the RBA, which will include a list of the agreements that it has entered into, all agreements, as at the date of designation. We can request to see all the agreements to satisfy ourselves around reasonableness, transparency, fairness, non-discrimination. They then are required each year to provide them to us. So it will provide a much greater transparency that we will report on and take into account as we exercise our functions.
Last question, does the ACCC have the powers to require divestiture of Armaguard if required and under this bill?
No.
Thank you. Fine, I think I'm going to drop out in 10 seconds.
We can come back to you when you come back, Senator Little. Just to follow on, I've just got a couple of questions for the ACCC. Just to follow on from that discussion about the monopoly. So just to clarify, so even though it's a monopoly, the ACCC oversight is required in your view because you want to achieve that greater transparency of the agreements, fairness and non-discrimination with those regular reports. Is that the main reason why you think that oversight is needed, despite the fact that it's very limited competition?
So, firstly, frequently in monopoly situations, particularly for critical infrastructure essential services, there are regulatory regimes to provide safeguards of the continuity of the service, of the fairness of the service, and given the importance, we know that low-income consumers, older age consumers, and also particularly small businesses in regional and remote areas are more reliant on cash. So we understand this is an important part of government, and including the Parliament's passage of the cash acceptance mandate legislation. So all of that we consider is the policy and important regulatory safeguards that are established. One of the points I did want to identify is that the criteria that we have to apply apart from the general objectives of this bill, including long-term economic viability of the cash distribution services, fairness, reasonableness, transparency, non-discrimination, efficient operation and investment, continued investment includes, of course, we always look, we are set up in the public interest. We are very, very focused on that. But it also includes the interests of customers, large and small, and the legitimate business interests of Armaguard. And that includes that we need to take account when we look at price, say they put an application to us, we are hoping to be informed by the independent pricing mechanism, that includes recovery of their efficient operating costs and capital costs and an appropriate return on their investment. So this is like a range of regulatory models that we undertake that ensure the continued capacity of the business to invest, and the explanatory memorandum does make clear, I'll just actually refer to the paragraph 1.148, that the legitimate business interest will include the requirements for safe and reliable supply of services, including other requirements in law such as those of the Fair Work Commission. So we are very conscious that the costs include safety of the workforce. Also, they include safety for customers in the locations. We're also very aware if there is not a continuity of service, particularly in regional areas, it's employees of small businesses that will be having to carry cash to locations such as the nearest bank, which may be some distance away. And so we know safety is part of this. I do want senators to be assured of that. It's one of the factors that will need to be taken into account in understanding the cost base that the business puts before us in the independent pricing mechanism.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer, and I was going to pick up this question of public interest and safety. In case you weren't tuning in earlier, we did hear very strong representations from both Lynn Fox and the TWU, particularly, and it is entirely understandable given the nature of the work and the nature of the cash and goods that are being transported. So you have given that assurance that safety standards is a key consideration of yours, along with the others that you've talked about.
Exactly, Senator, and we're conscious of it, and we do take note of it in other sectors as well, must be said, in our other regulatory functions, and we also heard about it at some length during the merger authorisation process.
Yeah, okay, that's great. In terms of arbitration and dispute resolution, that's been a little bit of a discussion with some of the witnesses as well. Can you just provide a view on, the importance that you place on this where parties can't agree on commercial terms?
There are, and valuably indeed, the Armaguard CEO spoke about that their top 20 customers are 80 to 85%, but then there's 1,300 in total of other customers. And there will be different customer needs throughout. And while the objective is that the standard agreement terms, which Armaguard will be obliged to provide for us their application for them, and we think this will be significantly underpinned, we hope, by the independent pricing mechanism, which is why we are very keen to get it as soon as possible, because it will actually provide the basis for the information to inform each of the steps that then sit in this important regulatory framework. But there will be standard agreement terms, which will be reference terms, which will be transparent and known. However, there will be customers who may not be able to reach agreement, and there is not an obligation to reach agreement on standard agreement terms. The customers and Armaguard can reach other terms, and in that situation, they can go to arbitration. And the ACCC can appoint an arbitrator if they haven't agreed to the arbitrator. We also have the further power, which senators will be aware of, which is the power to put in place service level standards if we consider that that is going to assist across the whole system and to ensure whether in particular regional areas or all regional areas for particular needs, scale of needs, that there it is important for us to introduce those service level standards. They will sit there as protections and they will also inform the arbitrator.
Thanks for that. I'm finished with my ACCC questions, so maybe we'll deal with each entity in blocks, and I'll go back to Senator Lill, who I think is back online.
Thank you. I have some questions now for Treasury, please. Treasury officials, subsection 1067 says the Senate cannot disallow an instrument appropriating up to $400 million of public money. That same section, only clause 6, says the Treasurer cannot revoke it even if he wants to. Can Treasury name one other Commonwealth statute where an appropriation instrument of this size is both non-disallowable and irrevocable without a levy act?
So, Senator, this particular power is modelled off of one that sits in the Corporations Act for the Financial Markets Infrastructure Crisis Regime. So that has been similarly modelled there.
Right. In your analysis, including any impact analysis, what is the assumption about the likely continuity of cash distribution, given that that's key to this bill?
Sorry, Senator, you're just breaking up a bit there. Can you please repeat the question?
So I'm interested in the impact analysis that was done and what assumptions were made about the likely continuity of cash distribution, which is key to this bill.
Yeah, Senator, look, fundamentally, this bill is about ensuring the long-term sustainability of the cash distribution system, so that's the intent of the legislation.
Did Treasury consider any alternatives to this policy, for example, requiring on what dates was... Yeah. Did you consider any alternatives to this policy?
Senator, we consulted quite extensively amongst the Council of Financial Regulators and the ACCC, informing a view on what was required, and that led to the consultation in 2025 based on the advice of the CFR plus ACCC as the best solution for addressing the long-term sustainability of the cash distribution system.
That advice was provided to government?
Senator, yes, I think the question was just the dates that we provided advice. I can take that on notice.
Can I ask also your understanding of what a crisis event actually means and how likely that is to occur, given Mr Kelty's evidence that they might consider this a crisis immediately?
Yes, Senator. Look, as some of the other witnesses have covered in the hearing today, the crisis readiness and resolution regime has been modelled on similar legislation for critical financial infrastructure and is very similar in powers that apply to ASX and other financial market infrastructure. The legislation does set out triggers for the readiness and resolution powers. I might ask the RBA to comment on the crisis resolution triggers and see if they have anything further to add.
Thanks, Tim. There are a range of thresholds, if you like, that can be bucketed along two lines. One is in respect to continuity of critical services, and the other set of resolution thresholds are linked to the viability of designated entities that provide critical cash distribution services. So they're the two dimensions, if you like, and under each of those dimensions there are some thresholds that are set out. It is important to point out, though, that there's no mechanical connection between one of those conditions being met, so compelling the crisis powers to take effect. The legislation is quite clear that it basically sets out that if one of those thresholds weren't met, the RBA could put into effect those powers, but it doesn't compel the RBA to do so.
So how close has Australia come in the past to a cash crisis?
Tim, did you want to take that, or did you want the bank to?
Happy for the RBA to take that one.
I think a couple of, well, more than a couple of years ago, actually, around the time that the ACCC was called upon to review the merger proposal, that gave us a good sense that the underlying economics were incredibly challenging and growing more challenging, and hence some level of intervention was required. So I think all parties have acknowledged that the underlying economics have been challenging for some time, and that's effectively why we're in the situation we are today.
That's the one example you've given me.
Senator, I'm not sure if everyone heard the start of your question. If you did, that's fine, but I didn't.
Okay, so, no, I think, so the cash crisis example in the past that you're giving me, it relates only to this particular company and this particular example, and this. Yes.
Well, I think the economics for the entire ecosystem have been challenging. Clearly, Armaguard, as it set out in its own response to the CFR consultation, Armaguard is a very material part of that ecosystem, but it's not the only one that's found the economics of the cash distribution system challenging.
So, of this size was an example of Corporations Act as being modelled on that. In those examples, was that with a Levy Act or not? With an associated Levy Act or not?
I'm sorry, Senator, I think we missed the first part of your question. The line was just breaking.
Oh, sorry. I apologise if you're missing the first parts of my question. It relates to the question I asked earlier about where
that's much better.
This might have been used previously, and I was told that it was related to the Corporations Act and modelled on something that had been done previously there using the Corporations Act. Can someone tell me if in that example that was referred to that that there's an associated Levy Act with that previous example?
Senator, I don't believe there's a levy associated with the financial markets infrastructure legislation, but yeah, to my knowledge, there's no levy associated with that.
Okay, so the entire financial impact statement for this bill is in effect one sentence. It says, any additional funding provided to the ACCC would have a negative impact on the underlying cash balance. That's obvious. So does Treasury have any actual estimate of the expected cost over the forwards, or is that unquantifiable?
Unquantifiable, Senator. But we're not expecting the crisis resolution powers to be exercised. I think it's important to state that the crisis resolution powers are there as a backstop in the event of a crisis, but we don't go into this legislation with an expectation of a crisis occurring in the forward estimates.
So how did you actually come up with the 400 million per event contingent liability?
So, Senator, the 400 million special appropriation estimate was based on advice provided by the RBA. So I might see if the RBA would like to comment on the 400 million.
Senator, I believe that our team constructed some estimates based on what they thought could be required to maintain operations for a period of time, and that information was then provided to Treasury to help inform the estimate of 400 million.
Is the 400 million, this might be a question back to Treasury, is that recognised anywhere in the budget papers?
Senator, I think the timing of it meant that it didn't actually get picked up in the budget papers, but it would normally be in the statement of risks. As it hasn't actually been passed yet, it wouldn't appear.
Okay. So just going back to the question of not expecting that you will require the crisis resolution powers to be exercised, what percentage chance has Treasury or the RBA put on the crisis-led resolution powers being activated, say, over the next 4 years? Has any analysis been done on that, or are you just hoping that that won't occur?
Senator, we haven't got a percentage estimate for you, but I think fundamentally the legislation is about ensuring the sustainability of the sector. The crisis resolution powers are a standard feature of any financial markets infrastructure legislations and are an important safeguard.
There's no statutory review for this policy. Can Treasury name a single regime where there's been no statutory review, and why wasn't it done for this one? Why wasn't it included in this one?
Senator, I'll have to take on notice the question of other precedents. I don't have that information to hand.
And this one?
I have to take that one on notice as well, Senator.
The compliance cost is stated as high. Can you explain what that means, and has a regulatory impact statement been prepared to inform that?
Senator, the regulatory impact statement hasn't. We were liaising with our colleagues who run the Office of Impact Analysis, and regulatory impact statement wasn't required for this.
Right.
Sorry, Senator Little, we can't hear you at all. The sound is really quite patchy.
Yeah, sorry.
That's better.
Is that better? Sorry, it's right in front of the microphone. Excuse me. Consultation the department had with Omicron specifically, and are you happy to provide that on notice in terms of the meetings that were actually held with Armagard in relation to this?
Yes, Senator, we can provide you a list of the extensive engagement we've had with Armagard.
And of course that would be Armagard Fox Group representatives since the merger, dates and attendees, if you can do that, please. Schedule 2 of the Consequential Bill, I'm going to read a sub-item, 5.2, says the ACCC's interim direction power does not apply to a service or access agreement already in force before designation unless it's been varied. Is that a correct reading of that?
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
So a company expecting designation has a clear incentive to lock in new or extended agreements before designation takes effect, putting those terms permanently beyond ACCC's interim power for the life of the agreement. Is that correct?
Senator, yes, it does mean that they're not able to access those changes to the contracts. I think it was on balance needing to take into account commercial considerations as well.
So that's the intention behind it. Do you intend to encourage a new agreement that is outside the scope of the new patents?
Sorry, Senator, would you mind repeating the question?
So if that's the intention behind that, do you intend to encourage Armaguard into a new agreement that is outside the scope of the new powers?
Senator, it's not sort of our role in terms of encouraging, or suggesting what commercial arrangements parties may enter into. I might ask Ms. Gottlieb if she'd like to add anything in terms of the ACCC's interim powers and the approach in relation to that.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Senator, for the question. We do think the having of the interim powers is important, and we are looking to use them, and as you're noting, they only trigger upon designation, but we are looking to use them as best as we can to provide certainty and continuity of the cash services on transparent terms. We would very much welcome the provision of the IPM as soon as possible. We are indeed working on a basis that it is in Armaguard's interest as well to move all of their customer base onto the IPM structure in a transparent way. They will have an opportunity, in fact, from as soon as the bill is passed and the Act commences, to give us an undertaking. And that would be one option for them to actually take initiative with us. They will be obliged within 30 days of designation to then put to us an application in relation to standard agreement terms, which we would expect to rely upon the IPM. Of course, we need the consultation with COBRA and other customers as we make our decision, weighing up all of the public interests and legitimate business interests. But Armaguard could immediately give us a fresh undertaking that would provide a path and that would provide indeed the sort of protection that the Armaguard CEO described this morning to the committee of wanting to, in effect, assure the vast majority of customers that there will be limited change in terms or detrimental change in terms. And so you are right, absolutely right, that the interim powers will not apply to arrangements that predate designation. However, we hope there is not a long period of time between the passage of the bill and indeed consideration of designation, and there would be the capacity for Armaguard, in fact, to work in the way it has described it wishes to for viability, and it has always supported bringing to the ACCC the independent pricing mechanism. So there is a regulatory protection also for it and for customers, and we hope that they will bring it to us and that process, including through will be open to them through an undertaking predating designation in order to take this forward.
So this is because
sorry, Senator, can't hear you perfectly.
Yeah, I'm interested in understanding, is this a loophole or an intended impact in which Armaguard could enter an agreement before designation and thereby be immune from ACCC's interim direction power?
So
If it's a loophole, should it be fixed up?
We would prefer no gap at all, Senator. As I understand, there were considerations given in the bill preparation about commercial considerations applying and also legal considerations, but Treasury, I think, would be better placed in that regard.
Treasury?
Senator,
Would you like to answer that?
Yes, that's correct in terms of the balance of considerations. That we needed to give some ability for the parties to consider commercial considerations.
Is the loophole the intended impact?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm just trying to understand, is that a loophole or is it an intended impact? Given we've just heard that there's a preference for no gap at all. So would the right fix be an amendment to this bill?
At this stage, I don't think we would try to amend this because I think there's a issue with commercial considerations in terms of ability to enter contracts. It's, I think, as Ms. Cascott-Leib said, would be preferable not for us not to have a gap. However, I think on balance, we were aware that people are in negotiations on contracts or may be in commercial negotiations.
So why should that run for the life of the agreement rather than for a defined transition period? Why should that carve-out run for the life of the agreement rather than for a defined transition period? I'm just trying to understand why.
In terms of the contracts, you're asking the question?
Yes, in terms of the contracts, in terms of, yep.
I think it's difficult for us to control the length of the contracts that people are entering. It is, I think, down to the commercial considerations of the organisations. As Ms. Cascott-Leib said, I think the preference would be that the IPM come forward and enable those as a basis for commercial considerations, and that would enable all parties to have more transparency.
Sorry, we didn't hear that at all, Senator Little. Are you finished?
Yes, finished and thanks for your
okay. No worries. Thank you. I've just got a couple of final questions. I think one to Treasury to start with, just to be really clear, I note that earlier Mr. Baird, in response to Senator Little around the resolution powers of the RBA, I mean, you did talk about them applying to other entities in the financial system and that this is not an unusual, you didn't say those words, but what I take to mean is not unusual to have this kind of crisis and resolution power for an entity such as Linfox Armaguard. I just wanted to, you may not have been tuned in this morning when we heard Mr. Kelty, I think, describe the crisis resolution powers as incredibly onerous and detrimental, along with some other colourful language of that nature. Wondered if, from a policy perspective, you could talk about why are the crisis and resolution powers necessary and what safeguards ensure that they are used only when appropriate.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So, yes, in terms of, you characterised my prior evidence correctly, and, I mentioned the financial market infrastructure legislation example, but that's not the only example. APRA has powers in relation to banks, insurers, superannuation funds. So it is very much a standard feature of to have a sort of crisis resolution framework for entities that have a significant and critical role in the financial system. They are there as a backstop in the event that there is a... So firstly, I think the RBA spoke about the two kind of sets of powers. There's a sort of crisis readiness sort of piece to make sure that entities are ready in the event of a crisis, and that the regulators have oversight of that, and RBA will have oversight of that crisis kind of readiness piece. And then the other piece is in the event of an actual crisis that the services are able to be provided, and given the critical nature of this of cash, and we've heard plenty of evidence this morning about the importance of cash distribution across the country. Critically important that were there to be a crisis, that the RBA is able to step in and utilise those powers to ensure that the services continue.
Thank you. However, unlikely those crises may be. So I think these questions are probably best for the RBA. I was wondering if you could take us through what risks arise if there is a critical cash distribution provider is unable or unwilling to continue essential services that they provide to the community.
Thank you, Senator. We know from our recent survey of the Australian community that around half of Australians are continuing to use cash at least once a week, and that around a third of surveyed Australians have self-reported that they would face hardship or severe inconvenience or disruption if they were to lose access to cash. So those numbers alone, I think, give a hint of the sort of disruption that it could impose on Australian households. And then there's, of course, the business ecosystem, particularly in parts of regional and remote Australia, where cash continues to be a very important part of, frankly, of the viability of those, the ongoing viability of those enterprises. So it would be in the highly unlikely but extreme event of a crisis, we would expect it to be, in the absence of these powers, we would expect that event to be very disruptive to the Australian community, to Australian businesses. And that is why it's not just the crisis powers themselves that we support, Senator, but perhaps even more importantly, further upstream from that, what this framework provides for is a much stronger ability to forestall the likelihood of any crisis occurring in the first place. For instance, by awarding the bank powers to gather information, to inform risk assessments across the industry, to set standards if and when necessary, and also to request remedial action if the bank were to assess that the risks were of sufficient magnitude to the Australian community. So the forestalling of the likelihood of a crisis is, I think, a particularly important feature of this framework, and we hope that with those powers that the crisis resolution powers themselves will never actually need to be actioned.
Yeah, okay, so it isn't just the inconvenience of someone not being able to go and buy some bread and milk down the street, but it, as you say, the economic consequences, particularly for rural and regional, as well as communities accessing support and things that they need. You know, these are quite serious consequences if there's a failure. So, then your point about the preventative powers, I guess, to intervene early before services fail. So, I mean, you've talked about, so am I right in I guess there's two kind of reasons why that's important and useful, and that is to stop it from happening in the first place for communities and businesses, but also, I guess, to give people comfort around this question about an intervention being required at all. Is that a fair summary of the sort of reasons why you've got both the preventative and, well, the preventative powers in particular?
That's right, Senator. These powers are designed to reduce the likelihood of a crisis occurring in the first instance. In the event that that is not possible, that a crisis does occur, to reduce the negative effects, the disruption, the systemic disruption across the Australian economy. That is what the second arm of these powers effectively is trying to address.
Okay, thank you. I think, given Senator Little's extensive questioning, all my other questions have been covered. So unless you have any final questions, Senator Little, I think we can finish up. You're good? All right. So thank you. That concludes today's hearing. Thanks to all of the witnesses who have appeared, and thanks for your forbearance in our delay in getting to hear from your evidence this morning. Thanks to Broadcast and Hansard as well for their assistance. If any witnesses have taken any questions on notice, responses should be provided by Tuesday, the 28th of July, 2026, and the committee now stands adjourned. Thank you.